Yo, what's good, my great sages? It's your host, Sage D. Samurai here, now here today to bring y'all a new What If. This being the What If movie to What If Subaru was an Uchiha. Thank y'all so much for tuning to this What If. I really hope y'all do enjoy. As now, with that being said, let's get started. So to begin the What If, we're now going to begin with the opening scene. Looking inside the interior of a temple, which was dim and quiet, we will see most of the space as it was swallowed in darkness, with the only thing granting visibility being the rows of candles that line the walls and pillars, leaving only fragments of the structure visible at a time. Then, the silence broke. A sharp grunt echoed, followed by a loud scream, as we see a man in black ninja attire as he was suddenly sent flying across the room. His body slammed into one of the stone pillars with force as the impact cracked the surface slightly, as he dropped to the ground coughing up blood as he struggled to lift his head. As you'll see, his hand rose trembling as he began to speak. Wait, no, please! But unfortunately, his voice was cut off. A blade moved through the darkness as a single slash ran across his chest. The man's body went still almost immediately, collapsing forward without another sound. As the one who stood before him did not move right away, as the figure was small, a child who looked no older than 8. His body was mostly hidden by the darkness of the temple, but two things were clearly visible. This being a pair of glowing red eyes, each marked with a single tomoe. As the child, now seeing that his target has been eliminated, would then turn and dash deeper into the temple. His footsteps light against the stone as from the surrounding darkness, movement began to form. Figures stepped out one after another, emerging from the corners and shadows as each of them wore the same black attire. Their face remained hidden, but their eyes were visible, red and matching his. As the moment they spotted him, they moved. Weapons were drawn without hesitation. Blades, kunai, and other tools were caught briefly by the light before being swallowed again by the shadows. As at once they charged, and the child did not slow down. Instead, he stepped forward to meet them. As the first attacker closed the distance quickly, he aimed a direct strike, but the child shifted slightly to the side as he then cut the man across the torso in one single motion. And he did not stop. Another came from behind, but the child just turned enough to the point where he avoided the blade and drove the katana straight to the attacker's side before pulling it free, as you'll see him continue forward. As in every single moment, we will see him as he passed through the group without hesitation and cut them down one by one, as each movement was direct and each strike was meant to kill. As there was no wasted motion, no drawn out exchanges, as the difference in abilities were clear. As we see bodies as they begin to pile up behind him, as within moments most of the group had already been killed. As the remaining few reacted at the same time as they jumped back, creating distance, and began forming hand signs in perfect unison. The sequence was fast and practiced, as then together they exhaled. As soon we will see streams of fire burst from their mouths, merging into a single large fireball that surged forward through the temple. The flames lit up the entire space as they rushed towards the child, who did not move. Instead, he simply watched the attack approach. Then, he let go of his katana. As the moment the blade dropped to the ground, we will see him as he raises his hands and begins forming signs of his own. His movements mirrored theirs precisely, as within moments he would then stop. Then he took a deep breath, before then releasing a large fireball from his mouth. As you'll see it erupt as it was larger, far larger than the fireball earlier, as the flames surged forward, and soon collided with the incoming attack as for a brief moment the two forces met. Then, the larger fireball pushed forward. The combined attacks were overwhelmed almost instantly, as the remaining attackers had no time to react. Their expressions shifted, but no words came, as the flames would reach them, and within seconds, they were consumed. The fire spread across the floors and walls before slowly dying down, leaving behind only charred remains as the temple fell silent yet again. And the child? He stood for just a moment, before then he continued to move forward. His steps carried him deeper into the structure, past the bodies and into the remaining darkness, as after a short walk we would then see a faint light become visible ahead. As then, he would move towards it without hesitation as he passed through the opening. As from here we will see the space change as the next area was wide and open, and at its center burned a large bonfire, its flames rising high, casting steady light across the room, as in it we will see several figures as they stood alongside both sides, as it will be both old men and old women. They'll be watching him already, as the moment he had entered, their attention focused completely on him, and for a brief second, no one spoke. Then, their expressions changed. Smiles spread across their faces, each one holding an arrogantly pleased expression on their face, as several began to clap, as soon the sounds of them echoed through the chamber. Finally, the time has finally come. Today is a wondrous day. The Uchiha clan's former glory shall finally be restored. The child will lead us into a new era of prosperity. Long live the pride of the Uchiha! As their voices were overlapped as the cheering grew louder, all of them stared at him, as now under the light of the fire, he will become visible to us. We will see him as he has short black hair, a face that showed no clear emotion, while his eyes remained fixated forward, the red glow of the Sharingan steady and unchanged, as his clothes, his hands, and even his face were all stained with the blood of the very people he had slain. He did not react to their words, he simply stood there looking at them, but this was a moment that Subaru Uchiha could never forget. As from here, this is where we're now going to do a flashback. From the moment of his birth, Subaru Uchiha had been placed on a path that others could not reach. He was born into the Uchiha clan, one of the oldest families in Japan, known not only for its long history, but also for its wealth and influence, as his position alone ensured that his life would be filled with opportunity, stability, and success. However, his circumstances at birth were not limited to status or fortune. What truly set him apart was the blood that ran through him, as a member of the Uchiha clan, Subaru carried a lineage tied to one of the most powerful abilities in history, the Sharingan, an ocular power unique to this clan, granting its users heightened perception, the ability to read movements, and access to techniques that could not easily be replicated by others. And as it evolved, its capabilities expanded further, making it one of the most feared and respected abilities ever known. But unfortunately, by the time that Subaru was born, that power had become distant. Years of peace and steady progression in modern society had dulled the conditions that once pushed members of the clan to awaken it. Conflict had decreased, hardship had become less common, and as a result, the Sharingan itself had grown rare, as many within the clan would go decades and spend their entire lives without ever awakening it. And for those who did, it often took them 30 to 40 years before it manifested. And even then, most could only reach the first stage, a single Tomoe. As advancement beyond that point had become increasingly uncommon, reaching the second Tomoe was already considered rare, and the third had become almost unattainable. And to the clan elders, this decline was unacceptable. A clan that was once known for its strength now struggled to maintain even a fraction of its former reputation. What had once been a symbol of dominance had become, in their eyes, a sign of stagnation. Then, Subaru was born. From an early age, he displayed a level of intelligence that set him apart from the others in his generation. But more importantly, at just the age of 8 years old, he had awakened his Sharingan. It happened far earlier than expected, and the last person to achieve something similar had been Itachi Uchiha. As that alone was enough to draw attention, as to the elders, Subaru was not simply a talented child, he was an opportunity. A way to reverse the decline, a chance to restore what had been lost, as their expectations grew quickly and their focus narrowed onto him alone. As what began as recognition soon turned into something else, something driven less by pride and more by greed. As from here, this is where we're now going to do a 9-year time skip. So now, flashing forward and doing a quick change of scenes, we now turn to see the interior of a home, which was quiet as the room followed a traditional layout, with wooden floors, sliding doors, and the light filtering softly from outside, giving the space a calm yet controlled atmosphere. And at the center of the room, you'll see Subaru as he sat there, his back facing the entrance as he was now 17 years old. And across from him sat 5 elderly men, each dressed in formal attire as their posture was straight and their expressions were firm. As the air between them carried a sense of authority, one that had been established long before Subaru had entered the room. As this was not a casual meeting, it was a hearing. As one of the elders spoke, his tone steady as he went over the recent developments within the clan. He spoke about progress, discipline, and the expectations placed upon those who carried the name Uchiha. as another followed, continuing the discussion as they spoke of standards, responsibility, and maintaining the image of the clan, as anything less they empathized was unbefitting of an Uchiha. Yet Subaru did not respond as he sat in place. His posture would be relaxed as his attention was elsewhere, as his gaze was lowered slightly onto his phone as he was currently scrolling on it. As while the elders continue to speak, they will be unaware about his lack of engagement, as then Subaru decides to speak up, interrupting them. Yeah, Uchiha this, Uchiha that, yada yada yada. Are we done here? Can I go now? His tone was flat and bored as he didn't look up from his phone, as the room went silent. Then their expressions changed, as one of them would lean forward slightly as his face tightened with anger. How dare you, you disrespectful brat! Enough. A voice came from the center as the main elder raised his hand, stopping the outburst immediately as the others fell quiet, though their anger remained clear as he looked directly at Subaru. Subaru, he would say, his tone restrained but firm. You do well to watch your tone in front of the council. As he spoke, his eyes shifted as a faint red glow appeared as a single tomoe formed within his iris as he stared directly at Subaru, who didn't react. He didn't even look up, as a small grin formed on his face as he continued to scroll. Yeah, whatever you say. Anyways, I got things to do, so I'ma head out, alright? He'll say this, his tone shifting slightly, taking on a light, almost cheerful edge, as he would then stand up. And without waiting for a response, he would then turn and begin to walk towards the exit. As from behind him, the room erupted. Voices overlapped as the elders began shouting, their earlier composure breaking apart as Subaru ignored all of it. As he continued forward, however, just as he reached the doorway, this is when the main elder's voice would then cut through the noise. You insolent child! Subaru stopped. One way or another, you will learn respect, and you will fulfill your responsibilities to the clan. The elder stood up now, his voice raised as his Sharingan remained active. It is your fate! Subaru remained still for a moment. Then, he would let out a low chuckle. Jeez, you guys sure do love to talk a lot. Although, I have a quick question to ask you. Just who the fuck you think you're talking to? He turned around, his expression now changed as the casual attitude was gone, and in its place was something colder, more focused as his eyes met theirs, and the room shifted. As the red glow was returned, but this time it was different. The pattern within his eyes was far more complex than the single tomoe of the elders, as within Subaru's eyes he held the Mangekyo Sharingan. As the moment it appeared, the atmosphere broke. The elders froze as their bodies reacted before their thoughts could catch up. Several of them flinched while one of them leaned back instinctively. While the main elder lost his footing and fell backwards onto the floor, his expression shifting from anger to clear fear. As none of them spoke as they simply stared forward, while Subaru looked at them for a second longer before then letting out a quiet snort, as he then turned away and walked out the room as the room fell silent. As the elders stayed where they were, unable to respond and unable to do anything, as their eyes remained fixated on the doorway where the strongest of the modern era had long left. As from here, this is where we're now going to do a time skip as well as a change of scenes. So now flashing forward to after leaving the hearing, we will now turn to see Subaru once again. As he'll be walking through the city streets alone late at night, as he'll be frustrated and annoyed by how everything went down. As hoping to calm himself and take his mind off of everything, he decided to stop at a convenience store, buying a few snacks and stepping back outside, as while he stood there beneath the quiet night sky, he would find himself wondering what a life without pressure or expectations would even feel like. As he would wonder what his life would be like if he was truly free. But Subaru then decides to shake those thoughts away, as to him those were only a fantasy and that's all it would ever will be. However, while he begins to walk once again, this is when something strange then happens. As in an instance, when Subaru closes his eyes and then opened them once again, this is when the night around him would then vanish. The city streets were replaced by bright sunlight and stone buildings, as within a crowd we will see humans and demi-humans as they move through an unfamiliar world, walking right past Subaru, who was shocked beyond belief. As activating his Sharingan, he would try to dispel it, thinking it was a genjutsu, but nothing changed. As realizing this was no mere illusion, Subaru would then slowly break out into a grin, as against all logic, he had truly been transported somewhere else. He had been summoned into an entirely new world. As now, following Subaru's arrival in this new world, we will see events as they begin to unfold similar to the main timeline. As after confirming that he was experiencing something that was actually real right now, Subaru would begin to explore the area around him, as the kingdom was unfamiliar, filled with sites and structures that did not exist in the original world unless you saw them in literature that held fantasy within them, or you just saw them throughout history. But despite this, he adapted quickly, moving through the streets with steady pace, as while observing everything around him, you'll see him pass by various stands and shops, taking notes of the different goods being sold, and at one point, he even stopped in front of a fruit stand, noticing a pile of apples. However, he soon learned that they were referred to as apples in this world, as attempting to buy one, Subaru reached for his money. And it did not go well. The vendor quickly pointed out that the currency Subaru offered had no value, as the interaction ended with Subaru being chased away, leaving him with no purchase and the clear understanding that he was effectively broke in this world. As after confirming this, we will see him then soon after continue wandering through the kingdom. As time would pass as he moved from one street to another, occasionally stopping to observe his surroundings, until eventually the lack of direction and growing fatigue led him to step away from the busier areas. As he found an alleyway that was quiet, as with no immediate plans, Subaru decided to take a short break there. As now, turning to inside the alleyway, we will see it as it will be narrow, with sunlight filtering in from above, as Subaru stood near one of the walls nearby, finishing the last of his water as he lowered the bottle slightly and then let out a small sigh. You know, you'd think after getting transported to another world, the person who summoned you would at least have the decency of giving you a map. He will say this absentmindedly as he tilted his head back and looked up into the sky. As a quiet groan would follow, but after a few moments he would just lean back there and have his gaze fixated upward. As despite everything that happened so far, Subaru found himself feeling lighter than usual. As for the first time in his life, there was nothing directing him. No clan, no elders, no expectations placed on him, as there was no system demanding anything from him, as in this world, he simply was alone. And because of that, he was free. As Subaru's expression softened just a bit, as a faint smile appeared on his face, as he let the feeling sit there for just a moment before then his thoughts shifted to what he should do next. But before he could think further, footsteps echoed from deep within the alley as Subaru lowered his gaze. As soon, 3 figures approached, moving with clear intent as they stopped a short distance away from him. Their posture was aggressive as one of them then stepped forward slightly. "Hand over everything you got, or else." He would say this as his tone wasn't friendly, as Subaru stared at them for just a second. Then, he laughed. The sound caught them off guard as immediately one of them began to snap at him. "What's so funny?" Irritation clear in his voice as Subaru shook his head slightly, still amused, as the situation was hilarious. From the strongest of the modern era to a nobody in the new world. Still, I should probably stop them. It would look pretty bad on my first day here if I start randomly beating the crap out of weaklings. He would think this absentmindedly as he pushed himself off the wall, now standing up properly as before either side could move. This is when a voice would then cut through the moment, telling the 4 men to move out the way as all 4 then turned at once. As there, we will see a girl with golden hair and red eyes as she would rush past them at high speeds, slipping between them without slowing down. As Subaru's eyes followed her movement easily, his Sharingan being able to track her without effort as she leapt upwards before landing on a rooftop and then disappearing from their sight. As the alleyway felt silent once again as Subaru looked in the direction she went. Well, you don't see that every day. He would think this as he would then shift his attention back to the 3 in front of him, as they were already looking at him again, and this time they reached out to grab him. And Subaru, he didn't dodge. He simply looked at them, his Sharingan eyes activated as his eyes met theirs, and for a brief second, nothing happened. Then, all 3 of them froze as their bodies locked up, and within a moment, they would then collapse to the ground unconscious. As silence returned to the alley, as Subaru looked at the 3 before then shrugging. "I guess I better start looking for work around here." He would mutter this absentmindedly as he stepped forward, casually walking over them as if they weren't even there as he continued towards the exit of the alley. However, a few steps later, this is when he would then slow down, as someone was entering. Subaru looked ahead as a figure came into view, and he didn't know this, but this encounter was going to change his life forever. As a silver-haired girl stepped into the alley, her purple eyes met his black ones, as after seeing him, she only had one thing to say. "Stop right there, you villain!" What? Subaru would think this mentally, as from here, this is where we're now gonna do a time skip. So, following Subaru's encounter with the silver-haired girl, we will see the situation quickly become clearer. As at first there had been confusion as the girl had mistaken Subaru for a thief, leading to a brief misunderstanding. However, once that was resolved, the conversation shifted, as the girl would reveal that something important had been stolen from her, this being an insignia. As from the way she spoke about it, it held obvious significant value, as when she asked if he had seen where the thief had gone, Subaru answered without hesitation, as he mentioned the rooftop, recalling the direction the girl had taken earlier, as the answer caused a visible reaction. The silver-haired girl realized she had gone the wrong way as the situation had become more urgent, and seeing this, Subaru decided to make a decision. He offered his help. As now entering to the scene, we will see Subaru as he stood a short distance away, watching the scene in front of him as the silver-haired girl seemed unsettled. Her posture had lost its earlier composure as she tried to figure out what to do next, while floating beside her, a small gray cat hovered into the air as it spoke calmly as if attempting to ease her concerns. As Subaru watched the two quietly, a faint grin formed on his face. "Aww, that's so cute." He would think this mentally as the interaction felt light yet simple compared to what he's used to, as his gaze lingered for a moment longer, especially on the girl, before then he cleared his throat, as a sound caught both of their attention. "Well, if this thing is so important to you, how about I help you guys out?" He would say this, offering his assistance, as the girl looked at him immediately, as her expression shifted to one of suspicion. "Why would you do that? It's not like you have anything to gain from it." She would say this as her tone was direct, yet Subaru didn't seem bothered. "Actually, I disagree with that. How about this? I help you get your insignia back, and in return, you give me some information about this place." He spoke with a light smile, as if the proposal was something simple, which it was, as the girl narrowed her eyes slightly at him, studying him, trying to see if he had any malicious intent, as she didn't respond right away. But before she could even think of a response, this is when the cat would then speak up. "I think you should accept it, Leah. Another set of eyes wouldn't hurt, you know." The girl glanced at him, then back at Subaru, as a few seconds passed before then eventually she let out a small sigh. "Fine, but if you slow us down, we'll leave you behind." She would say this as Subaru rolled his eyes slightly. Yeah, got it," as he stepped forward, and as he did, the cat floated forward, stopping right in front of his face with a small smile. "Well then, since we're going to be working together, I guess we should introduce ourselves properly." Subaru nodded at this as the cat spoke first. "Name's Puck. Nice to meet you." Subaru gave a small smile before then giving out his own name, as then his gaze shifted to that of the girl as he would be waiting for her. She would hesitate as for a moment she didn't say anything, before then she looked slightly to the side. "My name is Satella." As after this is where we're now going to do another time skip. So after meeting with Satella and Puck, we'll see Subaru as he begins to travel with them through the kingdom. Along the way, he eventually learned that the name of this place he had been summoned to would be the Dragon Kingdom of Lagunica. As the three of them moved from one area to another, searching for any information regarding the stolen insignia, as they checked different parts of the city, speaking to various people, but much just like in the main timeline, none of their efforts led to anything useful. Yet despite this, Subaru continued to observe his surroundings, and it didn't take him long for him to notice something, as everywhere they went, people reacted. Not openly, but it was clear. Glances, whispers, expressions that shifted the moment they passed by, as at first Subaru wasn't sure what to make of it, but as it continued, it became harder to ignore. As now entering to the scene, we will see Subaru as he walked alongside Satella through a crowded street. People moved around them, going about their business as usual, as the noise of the city filled the air, blending into a constant background hum as they were heading towards another location, hoping to find someone who might have information. However, as they walked, Subaru's eyes shifted slightly. He noticed it again as another glance went their way. Then another, as these looks weren't subtle. Some were worried, others carried clear discomfort, while others just showed pure rage, as Subaru frowned slightly. "The hell did I do?" As Subaru would think this mentally as he glanced at a passing group, only to see them quickly look away. As his confusion grew, as after a moment he then turned his head towards Satella. As she was walking beside him, but her posture had changed slightly. Her gaze was lowered as she didn't look at anyone, while Puck floated nearby as his small form hovered at her shoulder level. However, every now and then, his expression would shift, as he sent a brief glare towards anyone who stared too long. As Subaru watched this for a second, before then, it clicked. As looking at Satella, the realization settled in as Subaru hesitated briefly before then speaking up. Hey, I don't mean to be rude or anything, but do you know why people are looking at you like that? The question made her flinch slightly as she didn't answer right away. As a few seconds passed as she kept her gaze down before then quietly she began to speak. It's because I'm a half-elf. Her voice was low as Subaru blinked at this. A half-elf? So it's some type of discrimination. As even if he knew what it was, Subaru still couldn't understand the reason behind it. Still, why half-elves specifically? The thought crossed his mind, but he didn't dwell on it, as instead he looked at her again as her expressions hadn't changed. If anything, she seemed more withdrawn. And Subaru seeing this then exhaled lightly as then he began to speak. Dang. So are you like 1,000 years old or something? Satella immediately looked up, her eyes widening in shock while Subaru had a small grin on his face. I mean, where I'm from, elves are usually way older than they look. So, I'm not that old! Her response came out louder than expected as her face turned red almost instantly. As Subaru seeing this then laughed. Alright, my bad. Satella looked away now, a clear pout forming on her face as she continued to walk forward. As the tension from earlier shifted slightly as it now eased, but after a few seconds, Subaru's expression didn't change, as the grin faded into something more relaxed and mature. But seriously, I don't really see anything wrong with being a half-elf. Me personally, I'd rather judge someone based on who they are as a person, rather than how they look. Satella slowed slightly as Subaru continued walking forward, moving just a step ahead of her as there was no teasing in his voice this time, as he truly meant every word behind it. And Satella, she would look at him as her expression softened, and for a moment she didn't say anything, but then we would see it. A small, genuine smile formed on her face as it was subtle, a little shy, but real. As she kept her eyes on Subaru's back as they continued forward together. As the crowd moved around them as they made their way through the city, as from here we will now flash to a few moments later. So after spending more time in the city searching, we will see Subaru, Satella, and Puck as they were finally able to gather some useful information on the thief. The first being that her name was Fel, and finding out that she lived in the slums. As Subaru, Satella, and Puck made their way there, following the same path as the main timeline, as they would arrive in the early afternoon, stepping into an area that was noticeably different from the rest of the city. The slums were quieter in some ways, but the atmosphere was heavier. The buildings were worn down as the people carried a much more guarded presence. As the trio spent some time searching, asking around for any information that could lead them to Felt, with at one point Subaru choosing to trade a bag of chips in exchange for information, which earned him a clear look of disapproval from Satella, as she didn't want him to waste anything on her, but despite that, it worked. As they were eventually told where to go, as eventually they would then arrive at an old loot house, as we will now turn to the scene. By the time they arrived, the sun had begun to lower, as Subaru and Satella stood in front of the building, looking at the worn down door as Subaru glanced at it briefly, before then saying that this seems to be the place. As he would raise a hand and knock on the door, as for a moment there was no response. Then, footsteps would then be heard approaching from inside as the door opened, as there was Felt. As at first she looked ready to speak, likely expecting someone else, but the moment she saw Subaru and Satella, her expression changed. She tensed immediately and jumped back as she began screaming. "You just don't know how to quit, do you?" Her eyes locked into Satella as she spoke, while Satella didn't respond right away. Instead, she stepped forward and entered inside the loot house, with Subaru following behind. As inside, the room was dim but spacious enough, with various items scattered around, as near the back stood a large counter, and behind it was an old towering giant, as he watched quietly. "Give it back. If you do, I'll forgive you for what happened." Satella says this as she stepped forward, while Felt's posture stiffened, her hand slowly moving behind her back, reaching for a hidden blade, but before she could act, the man behind the counter then spoke. Excuse me, miss, but by any chance, are you a half-elf? Satella froze for a moment as Felt's eyes shifted, taking a closer look. Wait a minute. Half-elf? Silver hair? Don't tell me you're... It's just an unfortunate resemblance. Satella said quickly, cutting her off as the conversation shifted, while Subaru remained near the entrance as he leaned against the wall, arms relaxed, watching the exchange with mild interest. Then, something shifted, as from the door, a blade would be seen shooting out, aimed directly at Satella's head. And before anyone else could react, Subaru would move, his hands shooting up and catching the weapon mid-flight. The impact made a sharp sound as the blade stopped instantly in its grip as the room went still, as all attention shifted to him while Subaru looked at the weapon in his hand. Not every day you see a knife like this, he would say as he examined it briefly before tossing it aside without much thought. As then he would push himself off the wall before stepping forward to join the others, as now all four of them turned towards the door as silence held for a moment. Then a voice would ring out. Well now, I wasn't expecting anyone to catch that. It was polite but not sincere. Consider me impressed. Footsteps would follow as soon a woman entered through the doorway. She was tall with long black hair and sharp purple eyes. As with a faint, unsettling smile resting on her face, her gaze would lock onto Subaru, as the atmosphere in the room shifted immediately, as tension filled the space. Hey, what's the big idea here? We had a deal! Felt was the first to react as she shouted this, her voice sharp yet filled with frustration. Her words made the situation clear for everyone present, as the woman at the door let out a small chuckle, her expression unchanged. Well, seeing as the owner of the insignia is here, you must understand we can't properly negotiate under these conditions, can we? Her gaze shifted towards Felt as the smile remained on her face, however the intent behind it was no longer hidden. Honestly, I don't understand why my client decided to trust a gutter rat such as yourself with this task. And now, due to your failure, I'll have to slaughter every last one of you. The killing intent that followed was immediate. It spread through the room, heavy and suffocating, as Felt stiffened with fear. The old man behind the counter narrowed his eyes, his body tensing as he reaches for a weapon, while Satella froze for a brief moment, her breath catching up as only one person didn't react. Oh really? I love to see you try. Subaru says this, his voice cutting through the pressure as it was calm yet confident. As everyone turned towards him as he had already started walking forward, with Satella reaching out instinctively, trying to stop him, but Subaru just casually tossed her his grocery bag, telling her to hold on to that for him, as he'll take care of this himself. As turning to the scene, we will see Subaru as he walked until he stood a short distance away from the woman, as she watched him closely now, as there was now new light in her eyes as curiosity and interest filled them. Oh my. I feel like I'm being underestimated here. Do you really plan to take me on all by yourself? She would say this, her smile widening slightly, while Subaru shrugged while stretching himself a little bit. Of course. I've got an audience to entertain after all. He says this while rolling his shoulder once, loosening it up while having a cocky grin forming on his face. As that was more than enough for the woman, as in an instant she vanished from her spot and appeared directly in front of him. Her knife flashed forward, aiming to cut cleanly through his torso, but before the blade could connect, suddenly Subaru would vanish. The motion was so quick it left no after images as the woman's eyes widened slightly. And then she began to realize something. Her hand felt lighter, as looking at it she would then see that her weapon was gone. As soon, from behind her, we would hear the sound of faint footsteps as she would then turn. As there we will see Subaru, as he stood there with his back facing her. Not bad, but you're gonna have to be a lot faster than that if you want to get anywhere with me. He would say this casually as with the flick of his wrist, he tossed the knife aside as it clattered across the floor, sliding to a stop. As the realization set in, he had taken it. In that single exchange, Subaru had somehow some way been able to take away that very weapon she swung at him with little to no ease. As turning to Subaru, we will then see him turn his head slightly, revealing his eyes, which glowed red with 3 tomoes within his iris. As with a calm and focused gaze, he will begin to speak. Come on now, make sure not to disappoint me, okay? He says this, raising a finger and motioning towards her in a taunting manner. As the woman's expression shifted immediately, excitement replacing restraint as a predatory smile spread across her face, as she rushed forward again, drawing another blade from her clothing while Subaru stepped forward at the same time. As soon, the two collided at the center of the room, as with a loud boom, the impact created a small shockwave through the loot house. Dust shook loose from the ceiling as the wooden structure creaked under the pressure. Then, they vanished. To the others watching, they became blurs, as appearing and disappearing across the room in rapid succession. We would see wood splintering as they moved, the floor cracking under their sudden burst of force, and the walls shook as their movements carried them from one side of the building to the other. Zatilla tried to follow their movements, but it was too difficult even for her, as they were too fast. Meanwhile, inside the chaos, the fight was clear. The woman attacked relentlessly. Her blades moved in rapid arcs, each strike aimed with precision, but none of them landed, as Subaru avoided every attack with minimal effort, as each dodge was exact, guided by his perception, as he didn't even draw a weapon. He fought with hands alone and pushed forward, as every exchange ended the same way. Subaru's strikes would connect, as they would be direct and effective. As a hit to the ribs, a crack would echo. A blow to the shoulder, another would break. A strike to the side, more damage, as the woman's body began to break piece by piece, but yet her expression didn't show pain, only excitement as their clash continued, tearing through the interior of the loot house until they collided again, this time with full force as the impact slammed them into the center of the building. As this would send a violent shockwave through the entire structure, the ground cracking as dust and debris filled the air. Zatilla grabbed onto the counter to steady herself, while the old man stepped in front of Felt, shielding her as she held onto him tightly. As soon, the noise would begin to fade. The dust began to settle as visibility returned as we see the woman's body as it came into view. As she would be shown laying against the broken floor as her limbs were twisted unnaturally. Her ribs had collapsed inwardly and every bone below her neck had been broken. But yet, slowly, we will see her try to raise her head as her expression was filled with pleasure. But before she could fully move, a foot came down on top of it, as Subaru's shoes pressed her head into the ground, forcing it deeper into the cracked floor. "Come on now, is that all you got? You're starting to make me feel bad." Subaru says this, his tone mocking, as he applied slight pressure, grinding his foot just enough to keep her pinned. As around them, no one spoke. They simply watched the scene in shock and in horror as Subaru's eyes narrowed slightly. Through his Sharingan, he was able to see it. Her body as it was healing itself, the broken bones being able to shift back into place, and the damage reversing itself at visible rate, as Subaru's expression sharpened slightly. "So she has regeneration, huh? Interesting." He stepped back just as her arm snapped back into place and swung upward towards him, as the attack would miss as the woman pushed herself up and leapt back, creating distance. Her body had already returned back to normal, although her breathing was steady and her smile remained. We can now see a faint blush across her face as her eyes locked onto Subaru, as there was something unstable within them. While Subaru, he just smirked. "So you have regeneration, huh? I'll admit, it's my first time dealing with something like that. But I think I gotta work around for that." He would say this while rolling his neck slightly, as the woman's gaze softened slightly as she stared at his eyes. As this is where she begins to go on a rant, saying that his eyes were perfect, saying that he was perfect. As she begins to let out a small laugh, saying that the moment she sees his insides, that will bring her the most satisfying thing she has ever experienced. As soon, we will see the woman as she raised her blade and then pointed it directly at Subaru. "Tell me your name. At least give me that much." She would say this while Subaru didn't hesitate. "Subaru Uchiha. You make sure to remember as the person who sent you to the afterlife, alright?" The woman hearing this smiled as she would then begin to speak. "Then remember mine as well. You're facing Miss Elsa Granhirt, Bowl Hunter." As after saying this, we will see her move again, this time at full speeds, while Subaru didn't wait. His hands moved quickly, forming hand signs in rapid successions, before then, he would then utter the phrase, "Fire style, great fire annihilation." As soon, he would exhale, as from his mouth, a massive stream of flames then erupt, as the force alone pushed everything nearby back, as the heat spread instantly, filling the room with intense pressure. Elsa's eyes widened as there was no time to escape, as soon the flames engulfed her completely, as the fire expanded outward, tearing through the structure of the loot house as the walls caught on fire instantly. Beams cracked and gave way as the blaze consumed everything in its path. And Subaru wasn't done yet. He increased the output as the flames intensified. The color deepened as the orange shifted towards blue at the edges. As soon, the air warped. And then after several seconds of doing this, he would stop. Silence followed as half the loot house was destroyed. Sections of it had collapsed as the fire still burned across the remains. As behind him, Satella, Felt, and the old man stood frozen as they stared at him in shock. As soon, turning to Subaru, we will see him as he turned his head towards them, his eyes having returned back to normal, as sweat ran down slightly on his forehead. I might have gone a little overboard, he would say awkwardly. As from here, this is where we're now gonna do a time skip. So following Subaru's battle with Elsa, we will see the situation as it slowly began to calm down, with events starting to follow the main timeline once again as the destruction from the fight had drawn attention, and before long a knight with red hair and white clothing would then arrive onto the scene, as he would introduce himself as Reinhard. As he would be explaining that he had been on patrol when he noticed the flames and disturbance nearby, so he decided to check it out. As soon afterwards, we would then hear him get the full story from Satella, Felt, and Rom, this being the old man who would introduce himself, as Reinhard calmly assessed the situation. Meanwhile, Subaru just silently observed him, immediately sensing the overwhelming presence Reinhard seemed to carry, as their brief introduction to each other would be polite, with Subaru casually introducing himself and Reinhard returning the gesture respectfully. As soon after, this is where we would then see Fel as she stepped forward and returned the stolen insignia, apologizing awkwardly to Satella, but that's when at that moment Reinhard then noticed the insignia glowing in her hand. As his expression didn't change, as realizing something important, he suddenly grabbed Felt, declaring that she would have to come with him, as Rom seeing this immediately rushed in to protect her, but Reinhard effortlessly put him to sleep with a spell, as Felt tried to resist, but soon Reinhard would do the same thing to her. As Satella seeing this would then protest that Reinhard was going too far, but Reinhard calmly explained that there were more important matters at hand. As promising that Felt would not be harmed, Reinhard would then return the insignia back to Satella, but when doing so, he would actually call her Emilia. As soon after, he would then carry Felt and walk away into the night, leaving the ruined loot house, as the only thing that remained would be Subaru and Satella. As we will now enter into the scene. Satella stood there, looking toward the direction that Reinhard had gone, uncertainty lingering in her expression. Then, Subaru's voice then rang out. "So, your name is Satella?" Subaru's voice broke the silence as she turned quickly, surprise featuring on her face as Subaru stood there with a teasing grin. As Emilia's expression shifted instantly as she realized that Reinhard had revealed her name, as she then bowed down immediately. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to lie, it's just..." Subaru laughed, however. "It's fine, I already knew." She blinked. "You did?" "Obviously," he would say, as he tells her that she sucks at lying, with Emilia puffing up her cheeks slightly, clearly embarrassed, while Subaru just laughed again. As the tension from earlier faded, this is when after a moment, Emilia then exhaled softly as a small smile formed on her face. "Still, I should properly introduce myself." She stepped forward slightly, as then she would look directly at Subaru. "It's nice to meet you, Subaru. My name is Emilia." The moonlight filtered through the broken structure, illuminating her face, and for a brief moment Subaru paused. As soon we will see a faint blush appear on his face, as the moment to him was mesmerizing. As from here, this is where we're now able to do another time skip. So following the events at the loot house, we will see Subaru's situation change quickly, as after everything had settled, Emilia would then make the decision to bring him along to the mansion of her benefactor. Given the circumstances and Subaru's involvement in helping to retrieve the insignia, it was a reasonable choice and she wanted to repay him. As the one who guided them there would be a girl with pink hair who would introduce herself as Ram. Her behavior was calm, almost indifferent to Subaru, as she led the way without much conversation. As from there, we will see events begin to play out similar to the main timeline, as Subaru would arrive at the mansion and was given a place to stay, as after everything that had happened that day, he ended up spending the night there. As from here, this is where we will now turn to the next day as morning came. Subaru opened his eyes slowly, as for a brief moment he didn't move as his gaze shifted across the ceiling. As confusion began to set in, as he realized that this wasn't his room. The space around him was unfamiliar, far too refined compared to anything he was used to, as the bed was large and comfortable, the sheets clean and soft, and the furniture was carefully arranged and polished and clearly expensive. As Subaru sat up as he looked around much more carefully, and that's when he came to one simple thought. Yeah, this place is way too fancy. Even within the Uchiha clan, things hadn't been this excessive. Their style had always leaned towards something more grounded and more traditional. But this just felt off, and most definitely wasn't Subaru's style. However, the thought of his old clan, the second it crossed his mind, he would just roll his eyes and click his tongue in annoyance. As soon, he would then stand up and stretch briefly before then heading towards the door. As once outside, he would then step into a long hallway as the mansion was quiet. Too quiet. Subaru began walking as the floors were clean, the walls decorated with detailed patterns and framed art as the sunlight filtered in through the windows, casting soft light across the corridor. However, while Subaru kept walking, this is when he then stopped. As looking around, this is when he then realized that the hallways looked the same. Okay, this is most definitely the same spot I've been to like a couple of times already. He would say this with a small frown forming on his face as he looked behind him, then looked forward, as once again he sees no difference. As Subaru would sigh at this, before then activating his 3 Tomoe Sharingan, as he would then scan his surroundings carefully, checking to see if it was a genjutsu or an illusion, but soon after looking around, this is when he would then feel a presence that was nearby. As turning his head towards one of the doors along the hallway, Subaru would then walk towards it without hesitation and then open the door. As inside, we will see a library. Rows of bookshelves filled the room, stretching from the floor to the ceiling as the air itself felt almost heavy with quiet. And at the center would be a girl. She had long blonde hair styled into drill-shaped twin tails as her posture was straight and her expression carried a permanent, unimpressed frown. What an infuriating man, I suppose. Her voice was flat as Subaru blinked. Huh? Why is there a kid here? He would think for a moment as he looked at her, as his Sharingan flickered slightly as he observed, but after a brief moment he would then deactivate it. Hey, are you lost or something? He would say, his head tilting to the side slightly as the girl's expression darkened immediately. Betty is no child, and Betty is quickly becoming irritated with your presence here, I suppose. She would say this, her tone sharpening as Subaru stared at her for a second, then sighed. Yeah, sure. Anyway, can you tell me how to get out of here? He would say, waving his hand dismissively, as the girl, who Subaru begins to suspect that her name is Betty, then turned her head to the side with a small Why should Betty help you, I suppose? And Subaru countered immediately, because if you do, I can leave you alone quicker. Does that satisfy you? Betty paused as her expression did not change much, but she considered it. And after a moment, she would then raise her hand as the door behind Subaru then clicked open as she begins to speak up. There, I suppose. Now leave Betty alone. Subaru glanced at the door, before then just nodding his head. Yeah, got it. As he started walking towards it, but the moment he reached his doorway, this is when suddenly Betty's voice would then ring out. Don't move. Subaru stopped as he turned around, and when he does, he would already see her walking towards him. As she would eventually stop in front of him before placing her hand on his stomach, as Subaru had a confused look. What are you... Subaru then stopped as pain. A sudden, intense burning sensation of pain began to spread throughout his body. It wasn't external, but it came from within as Subaru dropped to one knee, his breathing turning heavy as the sensation surged through him, as the pain only lasted for a few seconds before then it eventually faded. Subaru steadied himself, pushing him up slightly, but as he does, his Sharingan activated again, as this time his gaze was sharp and cold. What did you do? Betty didn't react to his tone and simply looked at him blankly. I simply drained some of your mana, I suppose. Subaru stared at her for a moment before then exhaling as his Sharingan faded. Yeah, you're definitely not human. He would say this while standing up fully, as a small, smug smile then appears on Betty's face. So you finally noticed, I suppose? Subaru rubbed the back of his neck as he then turned towards the door again. Still, you could have at least warned me first. Next time, just ask. As with that, we would then see him walk out as the door closed behind him. As meanwhile, inside the library, we will see Betty as she remained still. Her gaze lingered on the door for a moment before then narrowing slightly. As she then turned and walked towards one of the shelves, as reaching out, she pulled out a specific book. As opening it, we will then see her as she flipped through several pages, as then she eventually stopped at one. Her eyes scanned the text briefly, as for a brief moment she would recall Subaru's eyes. The red glow, the pattern within them, as her gaze focused onto one word written on the page. As the word would be authority. As from here, this is where we're now gonna do another time skip. So following Subaru's encounter with Beatrice in the library, we'll see his time in the mansion as he continued to move forward. As not long after leaving, he would then run into the twin maids, this being Rem and Ram. As upon finding him, they would greet him properly and introduce themselves. As though their attitudes differed a lot, this is where we will then see them as they inform Subaru that their master had returned, this being Lord Roswaal. As Subaru was then guided by them to the mansion until eventually arriving at the dining area, as there he would reunite with Emilia, who seemed genuinely relieved to see that he was doing well after everything that happened. And seated nearby would be a man with a distinct appearance, as he would wear clown-like makeup, and he would introduce himself as Roswaal. As from there, we will see events as they continue to unfold similar to the main timeline, as Subaru was given a clearer understanding of the situation in Lagunica, as he learned about the current political state and the role Emilia played within it, as she was a candidate for the throne. As soon after this explanation was given, Roswaal will then shift the conversation as he decides to offer Subaru a reward. As Subaru took a moment to think about it before then eventually answering, as he only asked for two things: a job and an education. As just like in the main timeline, he already realized a major problem, this being the fact that he couldn't read the language of this world, and without fixing that, he would remain limited in everything he tried to do. Roswaal accepted this, and the result was Subaru being hired as a butler, and would receive lessons from Ram, as it wasn't exactly what he had in mind, but it was something. As we will now turn to a short while later. Turning to Subaru, we would then find him as he will be standing still while Rem took his measurements, as she'll be working efficiently, carefully noting down his sizes without wasting time, as Subaru let out a quiet sigh. You know, I probably should have been more specific about the job. He would think this mentally, as while he knew how to handle basic chores, the real problem was that he just didn't enjoy them. Still, he didn't complain out loud, as at least he was getting paid for it, as Rem would then finish shortly after. That will be all. My sister will give you a tour of the mansion. She'll be waiting outside, okay? She would say this calmly, while Subaru just nodded his head. Got it. He would then say as he then turned and began walking out the room as the door closed behind him. However, as he stepped into the hallway, his expression shifted slightly. A small smirk formed on his face as he would then look on with amusement. Seems like someone doesn't like me. He would say this, almost amused, as he continued walking. Meanwhile, back inside the room, we'll see Rem as she stood still. Her gaze remained fixated on the door that Subaru had just walked through, and her expression had changed, as the earlier politeness was gone and in its place was something more colder and more serious, as her grip tightened slightly onto the fabric. Witch cultist. The words left her lips in a whisper, as the air in the room filled with pressure. As from here, this is where we're now able to turn to a few moments later. So after leaving Rem that day and receiving a full tour of the mansion from Ram, Subaru's new life here would begin to settle into rhythm. As over the next few days, events began to unfold similar to the main timeline, as Subaru adjusted to his new role within the mansion. And while he still found parts of the work tedious, he did manage, as more importantly, he began to grow familiar with the people around him. As day by day, small interactions built into connections, as among everyone, the person he grew the closest to was Emilia. In this timeline, the relationship had developed more naturally, as Subaru's personality, which was casual, playful, and unfiltered, created an environment where Emilia felt at ease. As around him, she wasn't treated as a royal candidate or judged for her appearance, she simply was herself, and she appreciated that. And at the same time, Subaru found comfort in it as well. For the first time in a long while, he hadn't been measured against expectations. There was no pressure tied to a name or legacy, as here he was just Subaru. As those days passed by quietly, peaceful, but just like in the main timeline, that peace didn't last. As now, turning to Subaru once again, we will see him as he stood in the middle of a small village. As he and Rem had come here to gather supplies for the mansion, as while Rem handled the shopping, Subaru was left on his own. But he didn't stay idly by, as a group of children had gathered around him, curious and energetic about the newest recruit from the mansion. As Subaru smirked slightly, as for the next few moments, he began to perform tricks for them, as they'll be small, simple tricks, small illusions, nothing too serious but enough to entertain them. As soon, more of the villagers then gathered as laughter filled the area, and for a moment, everything felt light and normal. And after a while, the small performance came to an end as it would be right on time as Rem had returned back, holding a bag of groceries as Subaru noticing her would then immediately walk over. You done already? Yes. Cool, let's go. But this is when he would then stop, as before they could head out, this is when suddenly someone would then tug on Subaru's sleeve. As he would look down to see the children as they would be telling him to come with them, as Subaru paused for just a second before then shrugging. Alright, lead the way, but remember I gotta leave soon. As he then glances back at Rem, telling her that he'll be back in a minute, to which she didn't object. As soon after, we'll see Subaru as he followed the group, and after a short walk, they'll then stop. As at the center of their attention will be a dog, as he would have a bald spot on his head and was currently being held by a girl with blue hair, as she stepped forward slightly, asking Subaru if he wants to pet him. Now Subaru didn't respond immediately. His eyes focused, but not on the girl, but on the dog. As something was off. It was subtle, but there. A faint trace of killing intent, directed at him as his gaze shifted slightly to the girl in the same feeling. Again? What is it with blue-haired people and hating me? He begins to think this, as this now made 2 people, which wasn't a lot, but still, 2, it couldn't be a coincidence. Subaru didn't show on his face though, as instead he smiled slightly. I'm sorry. I'm actually allergic to dogs, you see? It was a quick excuse, but it was believable. And for a brief moment, Subaru swore he saw something flash in the girl's eyes, as it was pure anger. But then it was gone in a blink of an eye, as the children didn't question it. They merely tell him it was okay, as soon afterwards we'll see Subaru as he waved goodbye, as he then walked away. As now turning to the trip back, we'll see it as it will be quiet, as Subaru walked beside Rem, but his thoughts will be elsewhere. On the girl and on the dog, but more specifically the dog. I've seen something like that somewhere before. He frowned slightly as the image stayed in his mind, and it was quickly growing unsettling. As once back at the mansion, and after helping Rem store the groceries, Subaru wouldn't linger, as instead his expression had changed into something more focused and serious as he moved quickly through the halls, before then eventually opening a door that led to the library. Betty doesn't recall giving you permission to enter, I suppose. Beatrice would say this while not looking up, but Subaru would then respond immediately. Sorry, but this is important. That got her attention as Subaru moved to one of the shelves, scanning rapidly as his eyes moved quickly across titles. Then, he found it. He pulled out a book and began flipping through the pages at a fast pace as the papers rustled sharply in the quiet room. As then, he would stop as his eyes locked into a page, as without turning, he then spoke. Beatrice, are there any mobbies that look like a dog with a bald spot on its head? There would be a pause as Beatrice frowned. The only one that matches that description is a wogarm, I suppose. Silence followed as Subaru didn't move. The answer suddenly clicked as everything made sense now. Damn it! Subaru would think this as Beatrice took a step forward. And why exactly are you asking? But she'll be interrupted as Subaru was already moving. He shut the book and immediately turned and rushed out the library without another sound, as the door was slammed behind him. As soon, moments later, we'll see Subaru as he reaches the entrance of the mansion. His footsteps were loud enough to draw attention, as Rem and Ram approached him at the same time. And where do you think you're going, Barusu? Ram would ask this, confused and a little bit annoyed, while Rem said nothing, though her gaze had sharpened when she focused on Subaru, who didn't turn around. I'm heading to the village. There might be trouble. He says this as Ram frowned, but before she can say anything else, Subaru was gone, as he began running towards the village at fast speeds, while Ram clicked her tongue in annoyance. Unbelievable. I'll have no choice but to report this to Lord Roswell. Rem, can you go after him? If by some miracle Barusu is telling the truth, then we can't allow harm to come to anyone in Lord Roswell's domain. It will reflect badly on him. Her tone softened slightly at the end as Rem nodded, as she then agrees to her sister's request as she then stepped forward and ran after Subaru. And at first glance, her expression would be calm. But beneath it, something darker surfaced. Her eyes sharpened as it became cold yet focused, as a singular thought ran through her mind. I won't let you harm anyone, you witch cultist. As soon after she thinks this is what we're now gonna do, a change of scenes. Turning to when Subaru arrives at the village, we'll see the atmosphere as it was off. Villagers were gathered into scattered groups, moving quickly and calling out names, searching through nearby areas with growing urgency, as the usual calm village was gone and replaced by unease and rising panic. As the moment they noticed Subaru, several of them would rush towards him with urgency. You're back! Good. Listen, all the children, they're gone! Subaru's expressions tighten at this as he begins to question if it was really all of them, with another adding. Yeah, they disappeared not that long ago. We've been searching everywhere, we're worried sick. A brief silence followed as Subaru clenches his fist slightly. Damn it, I was too late. Subaru begins to think this mentally before then he calms down, as he lets them know that he'll find them, but before anyone else can respond, this is when a voice will then call out. Hey, over here, I found something! A villager would say while running over towards them, as soon afterwards we will then see moments later as the group then arrived at the edge of the village. As there we will see the wooden fence as it was broken through, as worried murmurs spread among the villagers. Some gasped while others stepped back, and Subaru himself just narrowed his eyes as he stepped forward. All of you, stay here. He would say, no, he would order this as he didn't wait for a response. As the next second, he was already moving, rushing into the forest as branches snapped beneath his feet as he pushed forward at high speeds. Just let me make it in time, please. Subaru would think this mentally as the deeper he went, the quieter it became. As soon, there would be no sounds whatsoever, as the only sound that would be heard would be from his own footsteps. And then, Subaru stopped. His eyes closed as he took a deep breath, as then eventually chakra surged outward from his body. As it was invisible yet overwhelming as it sped rapidly through the forest, moving between trees and across the ground, and reaching outward in all directions. And for a moment, nothing would be felt. Then, he would then sense it. Multiple presences that were faint and weak, and slowly fading, but still there, as Subaru's eyes snapped open as he immediately vanished from the spot. As rushing to the location, we will not turn to when he arrives, as the sight before him makes him freeze for a fraction of a second, as he will see all the children as they'll be laying on the ground, unmoving. Subaru rushed forward immediately, dropping to his knees beside the nearest one as he checked for a pulse, as it was weak, but still present. As he moved quickly to another, then another, as they were breathing but barely as each breath was shallow and fragile, like it could stop at any moment. As Subaru would feel his anger surfacing for just a brief moment before eventually he forces it down, as without wasting another second, he would then raise his hand before then speaking. Shadow Clone Jutsu! As soon, a burst of smoke filled the area as multiple clones appeared around him instantly, as Subaru would look at them. Take them back to the village, now. As with no hesitation, the clones moved immediately, each one carefully picking up a child before dashing back to the village, as only one clone remained, as Subaru turned to it. Go to the mansion and get Emilia or Beatrice, or both of them in fact. As due to his many days staying at the mansion, Subaru had learned that those two had the ability to heal others. And Rem too, but the thing is, Subaru wasn't too confident that she would help him. The clone hearing this would then nod before disappearing into the forest at full speeds, as Subaru was once again all alone. His gaze shifted as he closes his eyes again, as this time not to search but to think for a moment, as everything he read, everything he learned during his stay at the mansion was now all coming to him, as the pieces eventually came together. Wolgarm. It was a cursed type mob beast that didn't always kill immediately, and in fact it had the ability to mark others with a curse by biting them, as after a certain amount of time, that curse would drain the person's mana until there was nothing left. Which, for those who don't know, in the world of rezero, that means death. As Subaru's eyes would then open after recalling this, as he then realizes that the children were cursed, as his gaze turned deeper into the forest. If I don't kill the source, they're not gonna make it. The curse wouldn't stop, as his Sharingan then activated. The world sharpened as every detail became clearer. This is becoming a pain in the ass. Oh well, I just have to find it and kill it. He would say this while stepping forward, but before he could do anything else, a sharp whistling sound cut through the air, as Subaru tilted his head slightly as a ball and chain flew past him, missing him by inches before slamming into a tree in front of him with enough force to crack it, as silence would then follow. Seriously, Rem? Out of all the times you could have tried to kill me, you pick now. Right when I'm in the middle of being a good person? Subaru says this as he would then turn his head slightly towards the direction of the attack, as he spoke flatly and would have an unimpressed look on his face. As from the trees, we will see Rem as she stepped forward, as her expression was completely different from before, as it was now cold and angry, as her grip tightened as she pulled her weapon back. "Don't you dare act like you're not the one behind this! You witch cultist!" She would say this as her voice trembled with rage as she swung again. The chain cut through the air at high speeds as Subaru moved his head slightly to the side as the attack missed. As with another swing, Subaru would then dodge it again, and then another, as he avoided every last one of Rem's attacks with minimal movement. "A witch cultist? You really think I'm with those guys?" Subaru says this, amused, as he watched her calmly with his Sharingan tracking every motion. "From what I've heard, those guys can barely function properly. I doubt they even recognize the difference between an apple and an orange." As Subaru would say this while sidestepping another attack, but this only caused Rem to grow even more frustrated, as her movements became sharper and more aggressive. "Stop lying!" She would say this before then roaring, as then her horn would then emerge, as it would be emitting a faint pink glow as her presence intensified instantly, as the pressure began to fill the entire area, which Subaru had noticed immediately. Yeah, I probably should have figured she wasn't going to talk this out. Subaru sighed at this, as there was no point in talking anymore, not like this. "I'm sorry in advance, okay? But we're going to have to sort this out later." He'll say this, his tone softening a bit, as Rem charged forward again, weapon raised, intending on crushing Subaru, but at that moment, Subaru met her gaze. Their eyes locked onto each other for a few seconds, and that was enough. As Rem's body stiffened mid-motion, as her weapon slipped from her grip, as before long, she then collapsed to the ground without another word. As Subaru had placed her on a genjutsu. "You really should have just talked to me, you know that?" Subaru stood there for a moment looking down at her, before then eventually raising his hand again, as another shadow clone appeared. "Take her back to the mansion safely, okay?" The clone nodded before gently lifting up Rem and then disappearing into the forest. As now, once again, Subaru remained alone, as the expression on his face then shifted. The earlier calm was gone and replaced with focus and intent, as he then turned towards the deeper parts of the forest, as his Sharingan glowed faintly. "Now then, I gotta go hunt down a couple of Minji mutts." Subaru would think this, as this is where he would then step forward, as now the hunt was truly ready to begin. As now, turning to a few moments later, we will see Subaru as he moved deeper into the forest. The trees grew denser the further he went, as their branches twisted overhead, blocking much of the light that came from the stars. The air was still, and the only sound that was heard would be the faint movement of leaves under his feet. But yet, he kept his pace steady, as while doing so, he would be scanning the area around him until eventually he then stopped. As the forest fell silent, and for a brief moment nothing happened. Then, suddenly, two wall arms burst out from the trees, as they both would lunge at him from opposite sides. Subaru reacted instantly, as his hand moved at once as a clean slash cut through both of them, as the beasts were sliced apart before they could even land their attack, as their bodies dropped to the ground a moment later. Subaru glanced at them briefly before just thinking in his mind, "Yeah, these things are way weaker than I thought." Subaru thought this, as he was feeling quite let down by them, but before he could move again, a low growl then sounded from the darkness, and then another, and then many more. Subaru looked up, as from the shadows between the trees, we would then see movement. As Subaru would then see the eyes of a full pack of Walgarm emerging from every direction, the red eyes glowing through the darkness as they surrounded him, as Subaru's expression then changed, as a cocky grin then spread across his face. "Well, what are you waiting for, you mutts? Bring it on." Subaru says this in a taunting manner as the Walgarm then roared in response, as they charged all at once. And Subaru moved without hesitation, as he fought with his bare hands, striking with brutal precision as the pack rushed at him from all sides. As each movement was fast and direct, as he would avoid attacks and drive his fists directly into their bodies, as he ripped through the pack with little effort, as one after another the Walgarm fell. As soon we will see the forest floor as it became littered with their bodies, as Subaru continued moving until eventually he had taken care of the whole pack. As he would then stand in the middle of the carnage, breathing steadily as he looked around for any remaining threats. And for a few seconds, nothing came. Then, the ground beneath him shifted. A large earth spike then erupted upward from below, aiming directly at his body as Subaru jumped back at the last second, landing a short distance away as the spike shot harmlessly past him as he let out a low chuckle. "Well, you look at that. Seems like you must still have some tricks to show me." Subaru says this as he turned towards the source of the attack, as another group of wall guard then approached from the shadows. In that their front would be the one with a bald spot on its head, as its eyes were sharp and focused, as then it would be surrounded by a yellow light. As Subaru would then bear witness as the creature began to transform. Its shape shifted and expanded, growing larger and more imposing than the others, as in a short moment the leader of the pack stood before him in its strongest form. However, Subaru, seeing this, would not change. I've gotta admit, beating you guys with my bare hands was pretty fun. But you see, I've got a bunch of kids to save from your curse, so how about we wrap this up, shall we? As he'll say this while stretching for a little bit, as the leader of the wall guard then roared and slammed his paws into the ground, as spikes then burst upward and shot towards Subaru from multiple angles, while the remaining pack then moved in from behind. As Subaru, seeing all this, would just calmly raise his hand, as soon we'll see it. Lightning as it began to crackle across his palm, as the air around him sharpened, as the electricity gathered and intensified as he looked at the pack with a slight smile. Since you guys went through all that trouble to show me all your little tricks, I'll go ahead and return the favor, and show you one of mine instead. As soon we will then see it as the lightning grew brighter, more compressed as the crackling sound filled the forest, as now Subaru's whole hand was now covered in blue electricity, bright enough to light the trees around him as the sound became sharper, almost like 1,000 birds chirping at once. As Subaru's eyes narrowed as he then stared directly at the pack. This little technique of mine is what I like to call Shidori. As the moment that Subaru says this is where the next instance you will then see him vanish, as his movements were too fast to follow clearly, as all we will see is a blue flash as it tore through the forest, as he cut across the battlefield, moving straight through the attacking Walgarm in a single burst of speed. As soon we will then see it as the rest of the pack would collapse first, before eventually the leader would then fall as well. As by the time that the lightning faded, every last one of the Walgarm had been taken out in an instant, as the forest fell silent yet again. Subaru stood alone amidst the remain as his hand lowered slightly, as the last trace of electricity disappeared as he looked around once more, as now with all the Walgarm taken care of, the curse had been put to a stop. As now with this is where we're now able to do another time skip. So following Subaru's extermination of the mob beast, we will see the situation in the forest as it finally stabilized. With the source of the curse now destroyed, its effects would stop spreading, however that didn't immediately restore the children back to full health, as the damage had already been done. Fortunately though, by the time Subaru had returned back to the village, help had already arrived, as Emilia and Beatrice were there as they had been brought by Subaru's clones, as the children had already been gathered and laid out carefully as their condition was still weak despite being immediately out of danger. As you'll see, Emilia, she moved from child to child using her magic to stabilize them, while Beatrice worked alongside her with far more precise control, as this will cause them to gradually help the children recover as their breathing became steady and their color had returned. As strength slowly came back to them as villagers watched with relief as the earlier panic had faded into a quiet gratitude, while Subaru remained nearby observing everything, as once everything was under control, there was no reason to stay any longer, as the three of them would then head back to the mansion. However, upon arrival, we will see things quickly begin to get complicated once again. As you see, the moment that Subaru stepped inside, we will see a sharp killing intent as it struck him. As soon, we will see him have to avoid an attack that came fast, as he'll be attacked by none other than Ram, as she moved without hesitation, aiming directly for him, while Subaru reacted instantly. But before anything else could escalate, Emilia's voice would then cut through the tension, as her command carried authority as she ordered them to stop. Now Ram froze mid-motion as she had to obey Emilia's orders, as we could see her lower her arms as she was about to cast another spell. As soon after this, we will see silence fill the hallway as Subaru stood still, his expression neutral, while across from him, Ram lowered her arm slowly, but her glare didn't fade. It sharpened as she focused it entirely on him, as Emilia stepped between them, clearly unsettled. Ram, why would you attack Subaru? She would say this confused, while Ram didn't take her eyes off of him. Because he attacked Rem. The words sounded heavily as the atmosphere shifted immediately. Emilia's expression changed to shock as her gaze slowly turned towards Subaru, as there was some hesitation there as well as uncertainty, as she wanted to hear from him, to which Subaru just exhaled quietly as he was already tired of the entire thing. No, I didn't attack her. His tone was blunt and direct, while Ram's grip just tightened into her fist. Oh yeah? Then why did Rem return back unconscious? She would say this, snapping at him, as now all eyes were on Subaru, who just rolled his eyes slightly. Because she wouldn't listen, so I put her to sleep and dealt with the actual problem at hand. He'll say this as another wave of silence followed, as Ram's glare didn't waver. Subaru looked back at her completely unfazed, and then suddenly, we will see the air shift again. A sharp sound cut through the hall as we will see 3 ice spikes as they shot forward at high speeds, as Subaru tilted his head slightly to the side as they passed right by him as he didn't even move his feet. Whoa, look who's awake. Subaru says this flatly as from the hallway we will see Ram as she rushed in. Her presence was intense as she focused entirely on him, but Ram would immediately move towards her. Relief flashing across her face as she pulled her sister into a quick embrace, with Ram returning it briefly. However, soon we will then see her as she then stepped forward, brushing Ram aside as her expression hardened with cold hostility. Stay behind me, sister. I'll handle this, witch cultist. She would say quietly as the words sent another wave through the room. Emilia's eyes widened while Ram's expression shifted. Anger was still present, but now you could see confusion within her eyes as Subaru remained still, unimpressed. While Beatrice watched on from the sides, arm crossed and uninterested, as Subaru begins to mutter under his breath. This again. As he sighs, as he already prepares to defend himself, as Rem didn't hesitate. Her weapon lowered slightly as she prepared to move, but before she could, this is when Beatrice's voice would then cut in. The boy isn't a witch cultist, I suppose. It will be calm and certain as everyone turned to her, with Subaru blinking once, slightly surprised, not expecting her to speak up for him, as Rem's expression faltered for just a moment before tightening again. But he carries the witch's scent. He has to be one of them. Beatrice didn't look concerned as she simply ended up continuing. He doesn't have a gospel. All members of the witch cult possesses one. It's proof of their affiliation, I suppose. Subaru frowned slightly at the word gospel, considering the fact that that was something new that he never heard of before. Despite reading a lot of books here and despite quickly catching up on the knowledge of this world, there were still some things that Subaru didn't know of, and that was one of them. Now Rem hearing this hesitated, her stance didn't fully drop, but the certainty in her eyes were now weakening. Then what about his scent? And his strength? That's not normal. Her voice wasn't as steady as it was before as doubt began to creep in. As the room grew quiet again, as everyone looked towards Subaru, waiting and expecting an answer, as Subaru let out a slow breath. I figured this would come up eventually. Just didn't expect it to turn out like this. Subaru would think this mentally as he prepared to actually explain his ability, but before he could, this is when Beatrice then spoke first. It's because he has an authority, I suppose. The words settled into the room as this caused everyone to be surprised and confused, including Subaru, who just blinked. What's an authority? He would think this mentally, as from here I'm going to get into a brief intermission. So for those who don't know what an authority is or really haven't watched ReZero, I'm going to go ahead and keep this simple. Now, authorities are among the most abnormal powers in the world of ReZero, as they are abilities that are said to interfere with the laws of the world itself, twisting reality in a way that normal magic cannot, as their effects vary depending on the user. But you see, every authority carries an unnatural nature that separates it from ordinary powers, and normally an authority can only be granted through the possession of a witch factor. And that is the one accepted truth. However, in Subaru's case, that's not the complete truth in this one. As you see, entering back into the scene, we will then see the room finally fell silent after Beatrice gave her own explanation, as everyone was still processing what had just been said, while Subaru leaned slightly against the wall, arms folded, looking more confused than concerned. However, Rem was not calm. Her expression twisted sharply as shock gave way to anger, as then she would then rush at him in a rage, weapon tightening in her grip as killing intent flooded the hall once more, with Subaru sighing once again. Here we go again. Subaru would think this mentally as his Sharingan began to form in his eyes as he prepared to put her to sleep a second time. However, someone would interrupt that. Enough, I suppose. Beatrice's voice would ring out as at the same time, a heavy pressure spread through the room. It wasn't loud, it wasn't flashy, but it was immediate and intimidating. As Rem froze mid-step, as her body tenses instinctively as she turned towards Beatrice, her anger remained, although it was barely restrained by this point. Why? If what you said is true and he has an authority, then he must be... But Beatrice interrupted her coldly. Like Betty already said, he doesn't have a gospel. Her eyes were narrow as she continued to stare at Rem. His possession of an authority is strange, yes, but it does not change the fact that he is not part of the witch cult, I suppose. Her tone left no argument, as this causes Rem's words to die in her throat as the certainty behind Beatrice's voice crushed the last foundations of her accusations. As her grip loosened, as her weapon slipped from her hand and clattered softly against the floor, as Rem stared blankly for a moment. Then, the reality of everything she had done had finally reached her. She had hunted him, attacked him, tried to kill him more than once, and he was an innocent man this entire time. As her legs gave out beneath her, she collapsed to her knees, as Ram immediately moved, kneeling beside her and pulling her into an embrace before she could fall apart completely, as Rem trembled silently. Subaru looked between them, then at Beatrice, as we see a grin form on his face. "Wow, Beatrice, I didn't know you liked me that much. I guess you and I really are friends, after all." He will say this dramatically while placing a hand over his chest and wiping away fake tears, as Beatrice looked at him with complete disgust. "Perish the thought, Betty despises your very existence, I suppose." Subaru turned to stone dramatically as a cracking sound echoed in the room, with Emilia hurrying over in concern, as she lightly poked his shoulder as if checking whether he was serious or not, as the comedic moment lasted only for a few seconds, until Beatrice spoke again. "The only reason why Betty intervened is because your loud nonsense was disturbing my reading." And, as she would then look directly at Subaru, "because I want to know about your authority, I suppose." Subaru's expression shifted as he understood what she meant. She was talking about the Sharingan. As letting out a low breath, this is where he would then activate it, as his eyes then turned red, as the Tsunemori spun into place as the room reacted instantly. Emilia leaned forward in curiosity, Ram narrowed her eyes, while Rem stiffened. "That disgusting smell. It became stronger." She would say this quietly, her expression tightening while Subaru just heard her, and he had to admit this was something interesting to know. "I need to look into that later." He will make a mental note of this, but then from here we will then see him as he begins to explain. He gave them the basics rundown of the Sharingan, explaining its abilities, and he kept the explanation simple, leaving out the deeper details. As once he was finished, Emilia would be the first to speak up, questioning if that was his authority, with Subaru after hearing this then shrugging and leaning back against the wall. "I don't know about that." He will say this while folding his arms as he continues. "Because unlike the authorities you described, the Sharingan isn't something you randomly gain one day. It belongs to people with a specific bloodline. It's something that you inherit, and it's passed down genetically." He'll say this as you could hear his voice becoming flatter as a faint bitterness passed through him. The thought of the Uchiha clan crossed through his mind as he had to suppress the irritation that he felt just thinking of them. Although his answer only created more confusion in the room, as no one had a clear response. But eventually Beatrice turned away and decided to leave, saying that she had enough of their foolishness for one day, as Subaru after hearing this then actually had to agree with her. "Yeah, I'm heading out too," he'll say while stretching his shoulders and yawning. "It's late, and after all this nonsense, I'm feeling kinda sleepy myself. So I'll see y'all tomorrow," he'll say as he began walking towards the hallway leading to his room, but right as he reached the entrance though, this is when he then stops. As without turning back, he would then speak. "Oh, and Rem?" The room stilled as Rem slowly looked up through her tear-filled eyes as Subaru kept his back to her. "Don't beat yourself up over this, okay? You and I know we haven't exactly been close, but I don't hold any of it against you." This causes everyone to freeze as Emilia's eyes widen first. "But Subaru, she tried to kill you." She would say this as there was anger in her voice now, but not at Rem, but at the fact that Subaru treated his own life so lightly, which Subaru would let out a quiet chuckle at. "Yeah, I know. But she was just trying to protect everyone here. The people in the village too. Isn't that right, Rem?" He would say as his gaze shifted towards Rem, as there he will have a calm yet gentle smile, with no resentment as Rem stared at him in shock. As she couldn't believe that after everything she had done, after the hatred she had shown, he was still somehow able to look at her like that. As the guilt that she had been barely being able to hold back had shattered completely, as tears poured freely once again as she broke down, apologizing to him over and over while Ram held onto her tightly, her own expression softening as she looked towards Subaru as a silent gratitude passed between them. Subaru gave a small nod before then turning away as without another word he would walk down the hallway towards his room as the mansion grew quiet once more. As from here, this is where we're now able to do another time skip. So following the events at the mansion, we will now turn to the next several days that passed by, as they would remain relatively peaceful. During that time, Subaru continued to carry out his duties as a butler, though life in the manor had changed greatly compared to when he first arrived, as the distrust that once surrounded him had faded and replaced by genuine bonds that slowly formed through daily interactions. As Subaru and Ram had developed an unusual dynamic, as the two often exchanged insults, teased one another, and found ways to irritate the other whenever possible. Yet beneath the constant bickering was a level of comfort neither openly admitted, as their arguments had become routine enough that the mansion staff no longer paid them much attention. And by mansion staff, I mean Rem, who had changed the most in regards to Subaru. After learning the truth of her misunderstanding, she had become noticeably kinder to him and more open with him. The tension that once existed between them had disappeared, as it was replaced with casual conversation and mutual respect, as day by day a sincere friendship slowly began to form between them. And Subaru also formed a connection with Beatrice, though it was by far the strangest one out of the others, as most of their interactions involved Subaru entering the Forbidden Library uninvited, bothering her until she lost patience, and then being launched out by her wind magic. But even so, Beatrice never gone too far to harm him, and Subaru eventually realized that her harshness was more often than not a habit than actual hatred. And above all else, Subaru's bond with Emilia continued to strengthen. The two spent an increasing amount of times together, whether through conversation, shared work, or simple walks around the estate. As around Subaru, Emilia seemed more relaxed than before, she smiled easier, laughed way more, and gradually lowered the emotional walls she kept around others. And Subaru felt something similar. As for the first time in a long while, he found himself looking forward to each day, although he did not fully understand what he was feeling whenever he was around her, but whatever it was, he did not dislike it. As eventually these peaceful days would then lead to the day that the role selection was then formally announced. As an elderly man who would introduce himself as Wilhelm would then arrive at the manor, and accompany him would be a cat-like young girl named Felix, as Felix would then deliver a official summons regarding the selection, informing Roswell and Emilia that their presence in the royal capital was required, and preparations were then quickly made. As similar to the main timeline, Emilia and Roswell would then travel to the capital, although the difference in this timeline would be that Subaru's involvement, rather than him forcing himself into the matter, Subaru was personally asked by Emilia to accompany her, because of the trust they had built, and Emilia felt more at ease with him nearby. So Subaru would agree to this without hesitation, as from here we'll see events continue to play out similar to the main timeline, as after arriving in the royal capital, Subaru would explore parts of the city alongside Emilia, until eventually they would then meet Julius. As with polished manners, Julius would then gently take Emilia's hand and kiss it before offering to escort her inside the guard barracks. And unlike in the main timeline, Subaru did not openly react to this, although he still felt somewhat sour about the whole exchange. He didn't understand completely why, but he just didn't really think he liked it. But regardless, soon enough, we will then see the appointed hour then arrive, as after Emilia took care of her duties at the guard barracks, we will then see the royal selection as it would then begin. As Subaru would enter alongside Roswell and Emilia, as he will be introduced as Emilia's personal attendant. As one by one, the royal candidates would then gather within the grand chamber, as we see all of them, Priscilla, Anastasia, Cruce, Felt, and Emilia. As each candidate would then give their speeches, declaring why they sought the throne and what future they wish to build for Lagunica. However, when Emilia finished, the room fell silent, and for one brief moment it seemed as if her words had reached them. Then, a nobleman rose from his seat. "Is this a joke? Why should we believe a single word from that silver-haired devil?" Silence shattered immediately after he says this, as more nobles began shouting, with some knights even muttering in agreement, as insults filled the chamber, with them calling her a monster, a disgrace, an insult to the Dragon Kingdom, and saying that she deserves to be slain. As Emilia, hearing all this, would try to remain standing there, trying to maintain her composure, although you could see it. Her hands trembling slightly, her lips tightening, as in her eyes tears slowly began to gather. As right when she was about to break down, this is when suddenly a crushing pressure swept through the hall. The shouting stopped instantly, as it was no mana. It was pure killing intent. It was heavy, sharp, and suffocating as everyone turned towards the source. As we see Subaru as he began to walk forward. His eyes was lowered and his eyes was hidden beneath the shadows of his bangs. Each step echoed through the chamber as his expression was dark, and anger radiated off of him like in waves. As when he spoke, his voice was low yet cold. "All of you, shut the fuck up." The pressure intensified as several nobles stumbled backwards, as some of the knights instinctively reached for their weapons, as Subaru then stepped beside Emilia. As once he does, this is when he then turns to face the rest of the room as his Sharingan spun to life, as red eyes would then appear with three Tomoe staring across the chambers like predators locking onto prey. None of you have the right to stand here and judge Emilia or any of the candidates standing in this room. And if even one of you thinks your title or bloodline will protect you from the consequences, then you're surely mistaken. He'll say this as several people visibly flinch. However, this is when another noble, pale but trying to act brave, would then shout back. What are you talking about? You're just some worthless commoner who snuck in here. He'll say, barely finishing. However, Subaru, after hearing this, would then vanish. A gust of wind burst across the chamber, as in the very next instant, Subaru was standing directly in front of the man. The noble collapsed backwards in terror as Subaru looked down at him coldly. Because, dumbass, your so-called holy dragon chose these candidates. So by insulting them publicly, you're insulting the will of the very dragon you worship. And if I remember correctly, that could get you executed. A smirk would touch his lips as he leaned slightly closer as the noble's eyes rolled back as he fainted on the spot due to the fear that he felt. As gas spread through the hall as one of the members of the Council of Wise Men would then slam his staff into the ground. Knights, seize him! Many of the knights shouted in response and rushed forward as Emilia's face paled as she begged them not to do it, while Subaru just turned towards them calmly. One of the knights left first, sword raised as he tried to land a strike on Subaru, but it never landed. As Subaru drove his fist into the knight's stomach with terrifying force. As with a loud boom, we will see the man as he was launched across the room like a thrown object, crashing into a wall before collapsing unconscious as shock overtook the hall. As the candidates seeing them, all of them would have various reactions. Felt would jump up excitedly while screaming, "Yeah, you show him, big bro!" while Priscilla watched with amused interest. Anastasia narrowed her eyes thoughtfully while Cruce studied Subaru seriously, and Emilia can only stare in disbelief and horror as the fallen knight's sword would then flip into the air for a few moments until Subaru caught it with one hand, before it stopped moving. As then we will see him as he stabs it point first into the stone as he rested a hand on the hilt while looking at the gathered knights. "That's fine by me," he says, his Sharingan now glowing fiercely as he stares at every last one of them. "Whether it be one knight or 100 of you, I'll gladly fight every fraud in this room who calls himself one." Subaru says this as silence filled the hall. Even the knights hesitated, as then Julius moved. He left from the line in a flash, sword already drawn, as soon we will see steel meets steel, as Subaru ripped the planet sword free and blocked the strike as a burst of sparks exploded between them. Julius pushed with disciplined strength, while Subaru matched him with ease. As Subaru would look at him with a grin while Julius showed strain, until eventually a calm voice would then cut through the tension. "That's enough." Reinhardt would appear besides both of them so suddenly that neither had sensed him approach. One hand rested on Julius' shoulder, while the others on Subaru. Both men were forced still, as Reinhardt's expression was firm as he then turned to Subaru before speaking evenly. "I'm sorry for allowing things to go this far, but I must ask you to leave. Otherwise, I'll be forced to act." His gaze sharpened as he stared at Subaru, who looked at him with a smirk. "It's funny you say that, Reinhardt, because ever since we first met, I've wondered something. Which one of us is truly stronger?" He'll say this as his Sharingan eyes met Reinhardt's as the room held its breath. Tension built up instantly as both of them prepared to move, but this is when Emilia's voice would then ring to the chamber as she says that's enough. Everyone turned as she walked towards Subaru, took his hand, and then gently but firmly pulled him back. And then she would then turn towards the council and bow her head. I apologize for his actions." Subaru would stare at her in surprise as his Sharingan faded as he allowed himself to be led away. And as they neared the doors, one of the kinder members of the council would then call out, "Miss Emilia, if I may ask, who exactly is that man to you?" Emilia, hearing this, paused, and for a brief moment she did not look back. Then she answered quietly, "He was a friend of mine." Subaru froze as the doors opened as the guards escorted him outside while he looked back one final time. And just before the doors closed, he saw Emilia's face, as the emotions that were shown would be sadness and anger along with disappointment. As the moment that the door shut, For the first time in many years, Subaru would feel something that he had thought he'd long forgotten. Guilt. As from here, this is where we're now able to do another time skip. So turning to a few moments later, we will now see the sky above the royal capital as it remained clear and bright. Yet for Subaru, the warmth of the sun did little to ease the heaviness pressing down on his chest. Seated alone on a polished stone bench not too far from the royal castle, Subaru leaned forward, with his elbows resting on his knees and his fingers interlocked, telling enough that the knuckles had gone pale. The bustling sound of the capital continued around him as horse-drawn carriages rattled along the cobblestone roads, merchants shouted out offers, and distant laughters drifted across the streets. But to Subaru, it all felt muted, as his mind replayed only one thing. Emilia's face, the pain in her violet eyes, the betrayal, the sadness, the anger, as Subaru grit his teeth as the memory stabbed at him again and again. Damn it. Emilia, I didn't mean for things to go that far. He would say this mentally as he would sigh softly, dragging a hand down his face in frustration. For someone who prided himself on always being in control, he had lost himself completely in that chamber. And the worst part? He knew exactly why. As the moment those nobles mocked her, something inside of him snapped. As for the first time since arriving into this world, Subaru felt genuine pure rage at someone. And honestly, it made him feel ashamed of himself. As soon, the large doors of the royal hall would then open behind him with a heavy groan, as nobles and knights began to spill out in groups, voices loud in irritation as they discussed the chaos that had just unfolded. As the moment that many of them noticed Subaru sitting there, expressions shifted. Some glared with naked hostility, some narrowed their eyes with contempt, while others looked at him with quiet fear. And Subaru merely glanced at them once before rolling his eyes as he didn't care for any of them. As from here, we would then see several more groups as they passed by, until eventually another figure then emerged from the castle. This being Reinhard, as unlike the others, Reinhard did not immediately continue on his way. Instead, he scanned the plaza until his eyes found Subaru, as he would then approach him with a complicated expression across his face, as Subaru noticed and raised an eyebrow. What now? He would think this mentally, as for a brief second, Subaru wondered if Reinhard had come to settle what had nearly started back inside the throne room. A fight between the two of them, which oddly enough, the thought almost amused him, and he felt excited. But when Reinhard stopped before him, he did something that Subaru hadn't expected at all. He bowed deeply. "I'm sorry, Subaru." Subaru blinked at him as Reinhard kept his head lowered. "I should have never allowed matters to escalate to that point. My role was to preserve order, yet because of my negligence, you became entangled in such a disgraceful spectacle." The sincerity in Reinhard's tone was unmistakable as Subaru stared at him for a moment before then scratching the back of his head. "You know, Reinhard, you really are too nice." Reinhard lifted his head, confusion plain on his face as Subaru gave him a genuine grin. "But do me a favor, dude. Stop blaming yourself. That had nothing to do with you." As he would say this in a kind and mature tone, which causes Reinhard to almost admire him until the very next second. "Blame those nobles and those fraud knights for pissing me off." Subaru says this as he then pointed a thumb towards the castle, as we see his grin as it twisted into an exaggerated villainous smirk, as Reinhard froze. As despite himself, we will see a bead of sweat run down his face as he just agrees awkwardly to what Subaru had said, as even after everything that happened, Subaru was, well, still Subaru. But before Reinhard could continue, this is when two more figures then approach. As this will be Julius and Felix, as the moment that Subaru's eyes drifted to Felix, this is when they immediately narrowed. "Yeah, nope, still not over that, nope." Subaru would think this mentally as he still couldn't process the fact that the cute cat girl from earlier had in fact been, well, a cat boy. But Subaru physically shook the thought from his head as his attention shifted to Julius, who unlike Felix, who was having a usual playful demeanor, Julius wore a severe expression as his gaze remained fixated on Subaru with controlled intensity, which Subaru met it with a bored look. "What do you want?" Subaru would say as Julius stopped several feet away. "I see you remain as blunt as ever. Very well then, I shall be as direct as possible when it comes to this. You're going to have to come with me," he'll say, pointing at Subaru, who looks at him with a confused look. As from here, this is where we're now going to do a change of scenes as we now turn to a short while later. The roars of voices thundered through a large training stadium on the outskirts of the capital, as rows of stone seats rose high around a circular arena, packed with knights dressed in white and silver uniforms, as their faces were lit with excitement, anger, and anticipation. As today was no ordinary spar. Today was a punishment. As in the center of the arena stood Subaru, and across from him stood Julius. As dust drifted lazily across the battlefield, as tension thickened in the air. While Subaru, he would just rest a wooden sword over his shoulder as he looked thoroughly unimpressed. So this is what we're doing now? Public tantrums? Are you serious? Subaru would ask him as, standing beside Julius, we'll see Reinhard, who handed him a wooden sword, as concern was evident in his expression. Julius, please stop this now. I understand Subaru acted rationally, yes, but this is not the way to go about it. He'll say quietly, while Julius just accepted the weapon without hesitation. He insulted the nobility. He raised the sword and struck a knight, and he mocked the code that we uphold. He'll say this as the wooden blade then pointed towards Subaru. This matter must be answered like this. As then, while lifting his sword high into the air, this is when Julius then declares, I hereby impose judgment upon the fiend who has tarnished the honor of the Knights of Lagunica. The stadium hearing this then erupted into cheers and shouts and roars of approval while Subaru looked around once and then let out a snort. Wow, you people are really dramatic. Anyway, can we get this over with? I got things to do. He'll say while pointing the wooden sword at Julius, as Julius seen this would then vanish forward in a burst of speed. His movements were clean and refined, yet explosive, as even among elite fighters it was impressive. As Subaru's Sharingan then spun into life as he begins to think. Yup, just like I thought. He's stronger than the knight from before. From their brief clash earlier, Subaru already sensed that Julius possessed true skill, unlike the knight from before that he was able to take care with one punch. He's probably as fast as Elsa, or maybe even a little bit faster. Too bad he's facing me. As the second he says this, you'll see a grin form on his face as Julius swung downward, and before the strike could land, a loud boom would then be heard. The entire arena shook as gas exploded from the stands, as Julius was gone. As turning to a moment later, we will see his body as it slammed to the arena wall with enough force to crack stone. As silence swallowed the stadium as dust rained down, while Julius coughed up violently as he tries to rise. What happened? He'll say as he hadn't seen the attack. But before he could think anything else, this is when a fist would then crash into his face as his vision blurred. And before he could be launched away again, a hand seized his collar and hoisted him into the air like dead weight. Julius grabbed the wrist of whoever was holding him, struggling, as below him we would then see Subaru, his Sharingan eyes glowing crimson as he grinned arrogantly. What's wrong, Mighty Knight? What happened to that death penalty speech you were talking about earlier? Subaru asked cheerfully as Julius snarled and swung his wooden sword downward, only for it to then shatter against Subaru's forearm. As Julius seen this, his eyes would then widen while Subaru barked out a laugh. Bravo! So this is the strength of Lagunica's finest. Truly, it's an inspiration. All of y'all need to take notes on this, y'all. Like, look how strong he is. Truly worthy for the so-called finest knight is what they call you. Subaru would say this before then he would then toss Julius up into the air. As while Julius begins to fall, this is when Subaru will then drive his fist directly into Julius's gut. As the impact will fold Julius instantly as blood sprayed from his mouth, as his body became a blur as he rocketed across the arena, smashing through stone and collapsing into another crater. Several knights stood in horror while others stared speechless as he begins to realize the situation here. Julius was outclassed. As turning to Julius, you'll see him tremble as he forced himself to rise, pain screaming through his ribs as at least several bones already were now broken as his breathing was ragged. But while he'll be doing this is when suddenly a presence would then be felt as it will be right in front of him. And before he could react, fingers would then bury into his hair and yank his head back violently as a grunt tore from his throat. And when he does, his eyes would then meet Subaru's, as those crimson eyes would be cold, mocking, and merciless as they stare right back at him. As Subaru, while crouching before him and gripping his head, this is when he would then begin to speak. Oh, don't start looking scared now, mighty knight. After all, the fun has only just begun. He'll say this as a cruel and sadistic grin would then form on his face as a shiver of genuine fear crawled down Julius's spine. As for the first time in many years, Julius understood that he might have made a very terrible mistake. As from here, we will then turn to see the next several moments that passed by, as the arena became a host to a spectacle that none present would ever forget. What had begun as a formal punishment between a royal knight and an unruly commoner had quickly devolved into something far more brutal, as it became a one-sided domination, as Julius, hailed as the finest knight of Lagunica, was utterly overwhelmed. Every technique he attempted was shut down before it could begin. Every counter was read before he moved, and every opening he saw was turned against him, as every mistake he did was punished mercilessly. As Subaru moved to the battlefield with terrifying confidence, his crimson Sharingan eyes spinning as they tracked Julius's every breath, every twitch, every shift in muscle tension. As to those watching, it almost looked as if Subaru already knew what Julius was going to do before Julius himself had decided. As the difference in abilities was too vast, as everyone in the audience slowly began to understand this, as Julius never stood a chance. As turning to the current scene, we will see the arena floor as it was cracked and littered with debris. Dust rose constantly from the repeated impacts on Julius's body, as we will see a punch to the ribs, a kick to the shoulder, a knee to the stomach, and an elbow across the jaw, as Subaru attacked with ruthless precision, as each strike was placed with enough power to injure, but enough control to keep Julius conscious. As he was not simply defeating him, he was dismantling him. As Julius staggered backwards, blood trailing from the corner of his mouth as one of his eyes were swollen, nearly shut, while his breathing had become ragged. His once pristine knight uniform had been torn and covered in dirt and blood, but yet still with stubborn pride, he had raised his broken wooden sword once more. And Subaru, looking at this, would then sigh softly. Still trying? Julius lunged forward with a desperate roar, but Subaru stepped to the side with casual ease as the blade missed entirely. As in the same motion, Subaru would then drive his fist directly into Julius' side, hard enough to lift him off the ground, as a sickening crack then echoed through the arena. Julius coughed up violently as he was sent skidding across the stone floor, as the watching knights were now silent. The cheering from earlier had long vanished as many stared in disbelief. Others in anger and some in fear, as their ideal of knighthood was being beaten into the dirt before their very eyes. And soon, movement began to stir near one of the arena entrances, as the royal candidates would then arrive after hearing the commotion, as they stepped into the stands one after another, each reacting differently to the sight before them, as Priscilla would watch on with amused delight, one hand lazily resting near her cheek. Meanwhile, Fel would be leaning over the railing excitedly, bursting out into loud laughter, cheering for her big bro as she tells him to show up that stuff up night. Meanwhile, Cruce would stand nearby with her arms crossed as her eyes narrowed thoughtfully, as there was no ridicule in her gaze, only growing interest as she saw how strong Subaru was. And besides her would be Anastasia, who would look on with genuine shock and horror as she sees her once proud knight now reduced to such a pitiful state. As among all those who had arrived, none were more affected deeply than Emilia. As she stood frozen near the front of the viewing area, her hands trembling slightly as her silver hair shifted as she shook her head in disbelief, as she couldn't believe that Subaru would do something like this. As seeing Subaru right now, he looked like a completely different person as he looked at Julius with a cold and furious look on his face. As Emilia seeing this now, she felt terrified of him. As right before Subaru could do anything else, this is when Emilia would then scream at him to stop. As a crowd reigned through the entire stadium as everything froze, with Subaru's expression shifting. Slowly and almost reluctantly, he turned his head, and there in the stand stood Emilia. Her violet eyes were wide, filled with horror, fear, and sadness, and disappointment. The same, if not similar look that she had given him earlier, but the sight now hit harder than any blade ever could. As Subaru's Sharingan eyes would then be deactivated, as soon they would return back to its original black color, as for several seconds he just simply stared at her. There was no arrogance, no anger, no confidence, only silence and shame. As without saying another word, Subaru would then turn away and begin to walk out. As there was no triumphant declaration, no mocking laugh, no final insult, just heavy footsteps as they echoed across the broken stone. And Emilia instinctively took a step forward, as if trying to say anything, but no words came out. As instead, she watched him leave. and did nothing to stop him. As soon, Subaru would then disappear as the stadium would remain silent. The fight had ended, yet somehow, it felt as though something far more important had just been broken. As from here, this is where we're now able to do another time skip, as well as a change of scenes. So now, turning our attention to Subaru's room, we will then see it, as it will have furnished polished wooden walls, a neatly made bed, and a small round table near the window, as a lantern would be casting soft amber lights across the space, but yet despite the comfort around him, the room itself felt suffocatingly empty. As we will see Subaru as he lay flat on his back on top of the bed with one arm behind his head while the other rested over his stomach, as his expression would be blank. But behind those dark eyes, we could see his thoughts were in chaos, as he would be replaying every moment from the throne room as the nobles mocked Emilia and his anger boiled over. And then he recalled his duel with Julius, and in both exchanges he could still remember Emilia's face throughout the entire thing. The hurt in her expression, the disappointment, even the fear as Subaru clenched his jaw. As for all his strength, his power, and all the things he had gained throughout life, he still managed to ruin the one thing that mattered most. As Subaru would think about this deeply, as then a soft creak came from the door, as Subaru's eyes shifted towards it. As there, we will see Emilia as she opened the door and stepped inside, as she wore a downcast expression. As her violet eyes no longer held the warmth they usually did when she looked at him, as they looked tired. As she quietly shut the door behind her, as neither of them spoke or even moved, as the silence that filled the room was heavier than any battle Subaru had fought. As Emilia would remain near the entrance, hands lightly clasped behind her, while Subaru stayed seated on the bed, elbow resting on his knees now as his gaze was lowered. And for several long moments, the only distant sounds would be that of the city outside, as finally, Emilia would then hesitantly open her mouth as she attempts to speak, only for Subaru to cut her off. "I know, Emilia. I messed up big time, didn't I?" Subaru would say this while letting out a bitter chuckle devoid of any humor as he sat up upright fully. As he stared at the opposite wall rather than at her, as his voice was calm, but again you could hear the bitterness in his voice as again silence settled between them. Emilia's fingers tightened slightly, before then she would gather herself and step forward, as this time when she spoke, her voice was steadier than before. "Subaru, why did you go so far?" He didn't answer immediately as she continued. "What made you act like that? I'd never seen you behave in such a way." There was no accusation in her tone, only pain, confusion, and a desperate need to understand what made Subaru go so far. As Subaru's eyes narrowed at the wall in front of him, as his hands curled into a fist on top of his knees, before then he would then answer, "Because I couldn't stand it." Emilia blinked as Subaru would then continue. "I couldn't stand hearing them say all those things about you. Hearing them scream at you, curse at you, hate you for just existing. I couldn't handle it." He'll say this as you could hear the guilt and sadness in his voice while Emilia's eyes widened slightly. And for a brief moment, surprise would cross her face as Subaru lowered his gaze again, as his shoulders felt heavier than before. But after several seconds, Emilia would then softly speak up. "I see. Then I suppose I can understand why you reacted that way." She'll say, her expression conflicted as Subaru's eyes widen. A spark of hope rises in his chest as it was so sudden that it almost hurt as he begins to speak. So you understand why— Subaru. Her tone stopped him instantly as he froze. "Even if I understand why you did it, that does not mean I support what you did." Emilia was now looking directly at him, as while sadness remained in her eyes, there was clear frustration there too. As the hope in Subaru's chest shattered as he paled a little bit while Emilia took a step forward. "I'll admit, their words affected me more than I wanted them. And for a moment, I truly was happy you stood up for me," she'll say while giving a small pained smile as Subaru winced, as she'll then continue. "But then, you went too far. You insulted everyone there, you attacked the knights, you challenged all of them." As tears began forming in her eyes as she looked at Subaru with a look of distrust and betrayal which really stung at Subaru a lot. "And worst of all, you put your life at risk with no thought of how I would feel about it." Subaru felt as if he had been struck while Emilia's composure finally began to crack as she stood there trembling, tears spilling out freely now. Seeing you standing there in front of all those knights, provoking them, daring them to kill you, do you have any idea how terrified I was? Subaru did not speak, as each word pierced deeper than any blade, as he didn't even know what he could say. And then, just to make it worse, you go on to try to fight Reinhard, who is the strongest in Lagunica. Subaru, I thought you were going to die. I thought that I was going to lose my one and only friend. Subaru's eyes widened as the word friend would ring out in his mind, as these words would strike him harder than everything else combined, as no one in his old life had ever looked at him that way. No one had ever feared losing him, no one had ever cried for him, no one worried for him at all. As throughout his entire life, Subaru was put on a pedestal that made it to where everyone else thought he was untouchable, someone that they didn't need to worry for. But now, for the first time in his life, someone truly cared for him, and was now standing there in pain because of what he had done. As Subaru would lower his head, as his chest ached, as all he could do was manage a quiet yet broken, "I'm sorry." As Emilia cried softly for a few more moments before slowly regaining control of herself. She then wiped away her tears and took a shaky breath, as then after gathering what little strength she had left, she would speak again. "Roswell and I will be returning to the manor later." Subaru's head lifted immediately, as picking up on how she said Roswell and her, and not we or all of us, it just caused Subaru to be shocked as he gazed at her with a look of sadness, as Emilia couldn't look at him anymore. "For now, you will have to stay here. I think you need a moment to clear your head. And Subaru, if being around me causes you to act in such a way that endangers your life like this, then maybe it'd be better if we went our separate ways. Permanently." Subaru hears this as the words hit him like a physical blow. Heartbreak was spread through him instantly, as he would open his mouth but no sound would come out, as Emilia would then turn towards the door and then leave. As now, once again, Subaru was left alone. As he stood there motionless for several seconds before his legs would then give out, as he collapsed backwards onto the bed. He would throw an arm over his face as the darkness covered his eyes, as inside him emotions twisted violently. Regret, anger, sadness, confusion, fear, all of it was twisting around him as he just wanted to scream. But instead, all he could think of was one last bitter thought. Damn it. As from here, this is where we're now able to do another time skip. So following the fallout at the royal capital, we'll see the days that came after as it settled into an unexpected calmness. As we will see Subaru and Rem as they have been left behind, much like in the main timeline, under the direct instructions from Roswell. As Rem had remained in the capital not as a mere servant but as Subaru's watcher in order to make sure that he was okay. And for Subaru, these days would become something that he actually liked a lot and was something that he felt as if he needed. As this allowed him to reflect on everything that happened, as it also gave him time to relax, as he spent his time training and exploring Lagunica, and Rem was usually there by his side, as the two of them began to form a genuine friendship due to this, as now all the awkwardness from before was now gone, as even though they interacted before, there was still some awkwardness from, when Rem tried to kill him, but now all that is gone basically, as a true bond had formed. And for Subaru, it brought a sense of comfort he hadn't realized he needed, as even with the lingering pain about what happened with Emilia, these moments had helped steady him. But it didn't completely erase the guilt, as it gave him a space to breathe and to think and to grow, as eventually after several days had passed, Subaru would come to the decision that he would need to apologize, properly with no excuses, no deflection, but pure honesty. And the next time he saw Emilia, he would face her directly and say this. He would make things right. However, fate had other plans. As now entering to the scene, we will now see the road back to the mansion as it stretched long beneath the afternoon sky. Subaru rested his chin against his hand, his gaze distant while his thoughts would be elsewhere, as he would be wondering how he should apologize to Emilia. However, before he could dwell on it any further, this is when suddenly Rem would then scream, as this would interrupt his thoughts as he then turns to her asking what's wrong, with Rem having a pale face and her eyes widening with horror, as she didn't let Subaru know that her sister was in danger. As Subaru hearing this would be surprised, but then his expression would then harden. As soon after this, we would then see the two of them as they then rush towards the mansion faster, as Rem would then order the ground dragon to double the pace, to which it would do so. However, just as they were arriving closer to the village, as the outskirts of it began to come into view, this is when Subaru's eyes would then widen. As without warning, he would then move, as in an instant, he would then grab Rem and pull her away and leap high into the air, just as a razor-sharp wind slash towards the space they had occupied. As the carriage they were riding in was cleaved apart instantly, while the ground dragon didn't have time to cry before it was cut down and collapsing lifelessly. As Subaru landed several meters away, boots skidding slightly against the dirt as he absorbed the impact. As while gently setting down Rem, this is where we would then see his Sharingan eyes as they were already activated. As the crimson eyes would be glowing with cold fury, as Subaru would then order anyone who was out there to come out now, as there was no point in hiding. And for a moment, nothing would be seen, no movement, only silence. Then, rustling would then be heard. Figures began to emerge from the shadows of the trees, one, then two, then multiple of them, as they were in black robes marked with an eerie, unfamiliar symbol. As their presence alone felt wrong, as Rem's expression twisted instantly into fury. Witch cultist! Subaru glanced at her briefly, before then back at them, as a slow grin then spread across his face. Ah, so you're the famous witch cultist. Gotta say, seeing you up close, you're even more pathetic than the stories made you sound. He would say with a sharp grin as the cultist didn't respond. But then the tension in the air thickened as Subaru's expression then dropped as it became cold and focused. But unfortunately for all of you, I don't really have time to play, okay? So I'll make sure to end this quickly. As before anyone could react, suddenly he would then vanish, as we will see Subaru as he takes care of all the occultists in a single instance. As by the time he was done, the bodies would collapse across the ground, as not a single one of them had managed to fight back, while Rem stared at the scene in stunned silence. As Subaru would turn back towards her casually before telling her to come along, as they were wasting time. As Rem hearing this would then snap out of it and nod, as soon together they would then run towards the village. As the closer they got, the more resistance they encountered. More cultists, more ambushes, but none of them slowed them down. As Subaru soon summoned shadow clones, sending them out in different directions to intercept the threats before they could even reach them. And Rem fought besides him, her morning star cutting down enemies with deadly precisions, as step by step they continued to push forward until suddenly, Subaru would stop. As Rem seeing him stop would then turn to him asking what's wrong, but Subaru didn't answer. Instead, he stared into the forest ahead, as a bead of sweat begins to roll down his face. His instincts were screaming at him as something was wrong. As without wasting time, Subaru would then form hand signs as suddenly a large group of shadow clones would then appear around them. As Rem's eyes widened, but before she could ask, suddenly Subaru would begin to speak up. Go. Head back to the village and help everyone, alright? Rem blinked at this as Subaru continued. The clones will help you, okay? But you need to go now. Subaru would say this with urgency, as this caused Rem to hesitate as she wondered what was going on. But before she could question him any further, this is when Subaru would then turn to her. As he would then smile, as it would be confident yet reassuring, as he then begins to speak up once again. Trust me, alright? I'll be fine, but I need you to do me a favor and go help everyone, okay? I'll meet back with you as quickly as I can, I promise. As Rem's eyes widen after hearing this, but then she eventually accepts, as she'll send a nod towards Subaru before then running towards the village, along with the rest of the shadow clones. As Subaru will watch her go, before then, his smile would then fade away. His expression sharpened, as without another word, he would then rush towards the forest. As the ground beneath his feet cracked from the force of his movement, as he shot forward in the forest at a blinding speed. As whatever awaited him, he was gonna have to face off against it alone. As now turning to a few moments later, we will see the forest as it had gone unnaturally still. And through the eerie stillness, Subaru will be seen running. His feet pounded across the earth in rapid bursts, leaves and dirt scattered behind him with every step, as trees blurred past in green streaks as he pushed his body faster and faster. As his Sharingan would be spinning sharply within his eyes, scanning every shadow and every branch. As so far in his mind, Subaru could only think of one thing. What the hell happened? The thought repeated itself in his mind like a hammer, as only moments ago he had sent multiple shadow clones ahead to clear a path through the forest and intercept the witches cult that was swarming the area. And it should have been simple. His clones were capable, they were efficient, and they were nearly as strong as him. But yet, somehow, someway, they had all been defeated. And not in a drawn-out battle, not through a coordinated ambush, and not even through magical traps. They had just been destroyed instantly. as each clone that disappeared had sent a flicker of memories back to the original Subaru. Blurry flashes as all he could see would be a man in white clothing who was untouched by blood or dirt, gold eyes that were devoid of warmth, and a body standing amidst attacks as though the world itself had no permission to touch him. And every single time, the clones would just die. No damage dealt, no explanation, no resistance. As all those memories of seeing that caused Subaru to grit his teeth as he sprinted faster. That guy. Just what kind of monster are you? He would mutter under his breath as he burst into a clearing and then skidded to a halt as his boots craved into the lines of the soil. As from here we wouldn't see him as he formed hand signs, as a pulse of chakra then exploded outward from him in all directions, as an invisible wave swept through the forest, racing between roots and trunks, searching for life, movement, heat, hostility, anything. But you see, while Subaru closes his eyes and focus, there will be nothing. No presence, no heartbeat, no footsteps, no breathing, nothing at all. As his eyes slowly opened, as he begins to think that that's impossible. But how? I could have sworn he was here. Did I go the wrong way? No. Oh, it's another one of you. A voice would interrupt him from behind as Subaru's eyes widened. He twisted instantly and leapt backwards in the same motion, creating distance with reflexes honed through countless battles. As he landed low, one hand touching the ground as his gaze locked forward. As standing several meters away was the man dressed entirely in white. White coat, white pants, white shoes, and not a speck of dirt stained him despite standing in the middle of a forest battlefield. His hair was pale, nearly silver white, and neatly arranged as his gold eyes gleamed with detached arrogance and a faint smile that rested on his face, as though the world existed solely for his amusement. As he continued speaking as if nothing happened. Honestly, having me use more effort to deal with a pitiful existence like you is quite greedy, not to even mention a complete violation of my rights. Subaru's expression hardened after hearing this as he begins to think. How did he get behind me without me noticing him? Even with his Sharingan active, even with chakra sensing and spreading through the forest, and even with his instinct sharpened, nothing had warned him. It was as if the man itself didn't exist. As Subaru slowly rose to his feet, his eyes narrowed. Who are you? He would ask coldly as the man gave a satisfied nod, as though Subaru had finally met the minimum standard of his etiquette. It seems at least one of the vermin I've encountered today was intelligent enough to finally know manners. He will say this while placing a hand over his chest dramatically as he continues. So in response to your question, I shall answer appropriately. I am the Sin Archbishop of Greed, Regulus Corneus. He will say, his smile widening while Subaru's pupil tightened. A Sin Archbishop. Even with the limited knowledge that he knew from Beatrice's books, to understand what that title meant, that was the witch cult's highest monsters, walking disasters wrapped in human skin. And yet, even after knowing this, something about this man felt even worse, because standing before him now, Subaru felt nothing. No body heat, no energy, no sign of life at all, and if Subaru wasn't looking directly at him right now, he would have thought he didn't exist. As that realization sent a cold shiver down his spine, but still, Subaru kept his posture firm. So you're an archbishop, huh? Then tell me something. What exactly are you doing here? He'll say, with his voice edging with hostility, while Regulus sighed dramatically, as if burdened by the stupidity of others. Well, before you rudely interrupted me, I was making certain that slothful madman doesn't touch what has already been destined to be mine. Subaru frowned at this as Regulus continues, irritation growing. In doing so, he violates my right. My personal belongings shall only be touched by me, and yet he dares to interfere? The absurdity of that fool. To even attempt to harm my next bride. Even if she is a half-elf, he should know better. But perhaps, that's what I get for expecting more from a being utterly incompetent like him. But he never got a chance to finish. As Subaru would then vanish, the ground beneath him cracking from the force of his step, as in less of a second he would then cross the distance and drive a fist directly into Regulus' face. As the impact detonated like thunder, with Regulus being launched backwards and crashing through one of the trees, and then another, as silence would then follow. Subaru stood where he struck, chest rising with controlled fury as his eyes burned crimson. And a moment later, we would then see Regulus as he calmly stood up from the wreckage. No bruise, no blood, no dirt, no torn clothing, not even his hair had shifted out of place. It was as though Subaru punch had just struck an empty space, while Regulus touched his cheek once, briefly stunned, then his face twisted with outrage. How dare you? Do you find it amusing to attack a reasonable man? A man who has done no wrong? This is a complete and utter violation of my rights! He would say this by pointing accusingly like a noble offended over spilled tea, as Subaru stared at him with open disgust. As his Sharingan locked onto Regulus's gold eyes, as he begins to think that hit felt wrong, almost like punching air that was wrapped in flesh, as whatever ability protected him was unlike anything Subaru had faced off against before. But still, none of that mattered right now. You talk too much. All I see in front of me is a lunatic throwing a tantrum, Subaru would say in a low yet menacing tone as Regulus trembled with rage. Then, strangely, he inhaled deeply, smoothed his expression, as when he looked up again, his smile had returned. It was cold, perfect, and inhuman. Despite everything, you really are just like the others who came before you, Regulus would say softly while taking one slow step forward. But nonetheless, the results will always remain the same. I shall remain perfect, while you will die. The air around them tightened as Regulus's gold eyes gleamed as Subaru bent his knees, chakra surging through his body like a wildfire as lightning began to crackle around the palm of his hand. As soon we will see blue sparks as they begin to illuminate the clearing, as leaves swirl violently as the earth groaned beneath their feet. As now the battle between the Archbishop of Greed versus the pride of the Uchiha clan would then begin. As kicking off the fight, we will see Subaru as he moved first. There was no warning, no hesitation, as he immediately launches at Regulus with a Chidori. As in a blur of speed, Subaru crossed the distance between them and drove the crackling spear of chakra directly into Regulus' chest, as the impact was enough to split the earth behind the Sin Archbishop and blast the trees apart in violet lines stretching deep into the forest. But yet, Subaru's eyes widened. The Chidori had connected, he knew it, but instead of piercing the flesh, it has felt as though his hand had struck a hollow shell detached from reality itself. As the lightning dispersed uselessly as its destructive force was swallowed by something unseen. What's going on? Subaru would think this mentally as Regulus merely looked down at the hand with mild irritation. As Subaru would then grit his teeth as then he would then twist his hips and kick Regulus across the face, with the blow launching the white-clad man through multiple trees, trunks snapping like twigs as he vanished into the forest. And Subaru didn't wait. His fingers blurred through hand signs as fire gathered into his lungs. Then he would exhale. Fire style. Great fire annihilation. A sea of flames burst from his mouth like a natural disaster. Towering infernos raced across the forest, swallowing the area where Regulus had been thrown through, as trees blackened instantly as the earth melted, as the clearing became a furnace of roaring orange destruction. As Subaru stood still, chest rising, as he was watching and waiting. Then, every nerve in his body screamed. There was danger, but it was without sound, sight, or even a warning, as something invisible tore through him. A slicing force passed cleanly across Subaru's torso before he could react, as blood sprayed into the air, as his body staggered then collapsed heavily onto the scorched ground. And for a moment, the world became distant, and as his vision blurred, through the flames we could hear Regulus' voice. How vulgar. Launching an attack without permission the moment I finished speaking? Have you no upbringing whatsoever? Regulus would say, stepping through the inferno untouched, as not a thread of his white clothing was singed and not a hair was out of place. As his hands were folded behind his back and his eyes closed in smug disappointment as he continued. Had you apologized sincerely, perhaps I would have spared you, but I suppose I expected too much from an inferior being. He'll say this before then suddenly, from the earth beneath Regulus, a hand would then shoot out from below and seize his ankles. As before he could react, he would then suddenly be violently dragged downward into the ground until only his head had remained above the dirt. Regulus' eyes snapped open in disbelief as in front of him another Subaru emerged from the soil. You again? You crawl from the ground like some loathsome insect. How dare you present yourself before me after I granted you the mercy of death? Do you understand how insulting that is? The Subaru before him snorted before then exploding into smoke as Regulus would then look up. as above him we would see enormous flaming dragon heads raining down from the sky. As the real Subaru descended from the air, hands locked into a seal as his eyes was blazing. "Fire style, dragon flame bomb." He'll say this as the dragon slammed into Regulus's body as a thunderous explosion would then engulf the battlefield. As flames erupted skyward, tearing apart what remained of the forest as shockwaves spread for miles. Trees were uprooted and hurled through the air as Subaru landed in the distance, dropping to one knee as sweat rolled down his face. As then we will see him as he lifted his head into the air as the smoke from the explosion had risen high enough to create storm clouds. Lightning crackled overhead as Subaru slowly stood, a smirk forming as he raised his hand to the sky. As soon we would then see electricity as it surged upward from his palm, connecting with the clouds like a divine chain. And the heavens answered with a furious roar. When was the last time I had to go all out like this? He began to mentally question this as he almost laughed, before then turned serious. As from the smoke, Regulus walked out untouched once again as he looked up at Subaru with complete disdain. "Are you finished embarrassing yourself? All this noise, this fire, this destruction, and yet I remain constant. I remain perfect while you dance and jest your way towards an early grave. Do you have no shame?" Subaru clicked his tongue. Yeah, corny ass, save your lines of poetry for someone who gives a damn." As Regulus hearing this would then explode into anger, but before he could do anything else, the clouds above would then split apart. As soon we will see a colossal dragon of pure lightning emerge from the storm, coiling through the sky as thunder shook the area, as Subaru's grin then widened. "Kidding." He'll say this as he brought his hand down as the lightning dragon descended, and in an instant it will strike Regulus. As the forest vanished beneath a pillar of heavenly judgment, as white light consumed everything. While Subaru began to pant heavily now, as his body trembled due to the amount of chakra he had just used. "Damn, it's been a while since I felt this tired," he would mutter with a grin. But before he could think of anything else, this is when danger would then scream again. And before Subaru could move, a compressed blast of invisible force would then slam into him as his body, which was reinforced with chakra, folded around the impact. Bones cracked as blood burst from his mouth as he was launched across the battlefield and sank cratering into a stone wall. As when the dust settled, Subaru would groan as his right arm trembled and blood ran down his forehead as his ribs screamed in agony. "Damn it, I couldn't even see it coming this time." Using chakra to reinforce himself once again, we will see Subaru as he staggered to his feet, while Regulus would approach through the ruined battlefield. "I warned you repeatedly, through my patience, through my restraint, through my willingness to let you fail quietly, yet you insist on forcing this outcome." He will say coldly as he stopped a short distance away while Subaru spat blood and smirked weakly. "Do you ever stop talking? Because I'm getting tired of hearing from a man who hasn't earned half the pride he carries." Regulus's face darkened as then, with a smooth yet serious look on his face, he would then look directly into Subaru's eyes before then uttering the phrase, "Die," as he casually flicked his hands as another invisible blade would then tore towards Subaru. As Subaru would watch the blade approach, as unfortunately it was too close for him to do the substitution, and it was too fast for him to avoid, especially with the current condition that he was in. But yet, Subaru only smirked, as we will see the attack as it passed directly through him, and Regulus froze as Subaru's body had become intangible. And before Regulus could speak, a fist would then smash into his face as he was hurled backwards again as he landed sliding across the earth before rising furiously. "Just how long are you intending to persist in this offensive little game of yours? Refusing to die when ordered to is a blatant violation of my rights." He'll say this, however Subaru was already in front of him, as with another punch he'll launch Regulus into the air, and as he rose we will see Subaru's eyes as they had already shifted. The Tomoe warped as now in this place would be the Mangekyo Sharingan awaken. Blood streamed from Subaru's eyes as this is when he would then utter the phrase, "Kamui." As the space twisted above Regulus as two shadow clones warped into existence in midair. As together they unleashed a combined torrent of dragon flames and lightning directly into him as the sky detonated. Regulus would fall, but before he could hit the ground, Subaru would warp to beside him and unleash a barrage of miniature dragon flame bombs at point blank. and then warped to the opposite side to do the same thing, as Regulus vanished inside the overlapping explosions while Subaru landed far away, now truly exhausted as blood poured from both of his eyes, as his breathing was ragged and his body shook from the amount of damage he had taken earlier in chakra depletion. But still, he forced himself upright. Then, the temperature dropped. Subaru blinked as snowflakes drifted from above as the sky darkened unnaturally. Wind became sharper as within seconds, frost spread across the ruined earth as Subaru's eyes narrowed. What? But before he could think of any further, this is when danger wouldn't scream again as he activated Kamui on instinct. His body phased just as another invisible strike had passed through him as ahead Regulus emerged from the smoke, untouched as always. How disappointing. You're still alive, still struggling, and still forcing me to acknowledge you. How monstrously selfish can one insignificant man be? Regulus would say this as Subaru stared in disbelief. How is he doing that? He would think this as the cold worsened. A blizzard raged somewhere in the distance behind them, as spilling freezing winds would then enter into the battlefield, as Subaru quickly circulated chakra to generate heat within his body. While Regulus remained unaffected, as Subaru would receive memories from his remaining clones, as all of them died due to the sudden drop of temperature. Damn it! What's going on? Subaru would think this as grating his teeth, he would then make another attempt, as he focused Kamui, but this time directly on Regulus. As soon we will see the space as it worked violently around the Archbishop, as reality twisted, trees bent inward as the earth cracked, but Regulus simply stood there with his arms behind his back, unaffected. The warp space bent around him, yet he remained absolute. As Subaru's eyes widened in horror as then pain exploded to his left side. He will look down as when he does, he will see his left arm was gone, severed cleanly as pain erupted from the stump as Subaru dropped to one knee, clutching the wound while trying not to scream while Regulus watched on. How pitiful. You overestimated your strength, your resolve, your strange little eyes, and most of all, your worth. Did you truly believe some trick like that could affect me? You've mistaken novelty for power. Subaru glared murderously as now, there was only one option left. As from here we will see him as he gathers every remaining fragment of chakra, every drop, every ounce as his body trembled, his eyes bled, before then he whispered the phrase, Susanoo. Blue energy would erupt around him as a colossal armored avatar would then form, towering over the battlefield in divine fury, as within his hands we would see it. As within its hands, it carried the Tetsuka blade and the Yada mirror. Among the countless tales that were passed down through the generations, these weapons stood above nearly all others. As they were not simple tools of steel or chakra, they were sacred ornaments, powers that were so rare that entire generations of eras would pass by without ever witnessing them. The Sword of Tetsuka, a spiritual blade set to see whatever it pierced into an eternal illusion, removing foes and threat alike from the world in a single strike, as there was no regeneration, no mortality, no second chances. As once caught by it, the battle ended. And the Yada mirror, the so-called perfect defense, as it will be a shield set to shift its nature to match an incoming force, nullifying attacks regardless of the form or element, as whether it be ninjutsu, weaponry, or brute force, it was a wall that adapted faster than the destruction could ever reach it. As even in long history, very few had ever wielded one of these treasures, and to wield both at once, that belonged only to the highest tiers of monsters, truly fit for the strongest of the modern era. I've only got one shot at this, Subaru thinks mentally as Regulus looked up with a visible annoyance. It doesn't matter what shape your desperation takes, the results will remain unchanged. I will remain perfect, and you will die. As he'll say this with an arrogant smile while Subaru answered with grim determination. As soon we will see the Susanoo move as it would swing the Tetsuka blade downward as with a loud boom the impact would shatter the battlefield. A shockwave tore across miles of the land as dust and smoke consumed everything. Then silence followed. As eventually we'll see Regulus as he stepped from the haze, untouched, as he then sighed pitifully. How tragic. You gathered what little remaining strength that you had and reached for something grander and arrived at the same ending that was always waiting for you. He'll say this as we now take a look at Subaru Susanoo as it stood motionless. However, looking closer, we would see a hole in its chest, as the spiritual armor began to crack before then collapsing as the damage extended inward, all the way to Subaru. As looking at Subaru now, we would see the entire left side of his torso as it had been erased. Blood slipped from his mouth as his Sharingan faded. The red disappeared from his eyes as it became dull and empty as the Susanoo dissolved into fading blue particles. As Subaru's body then swayed before then falling backwards as darkness would finally claim him, as one final thought would cross his mind. I'm sorry, everyone. As there beneath the ruined skies and falling snow, Subaru Uchiha, the pride of the Uchiha clan, had died in combat. As from here, this is where we're now able to do a time skip as well as a change of scenes. So following Subaru's death at the hands of Regulus, we'll see the world as it would restart and drag his consciousness backwards through time. As when his eyes would open, he would find himself one day before the calamity had began, as he was right in front of the fruit stand that he and Rem had passed by. At first, Subaru could only stare blankly ahead in stunned silence, but then the memories of his body being torn apart, the mocking voice of Regulus, and the helplessness of watching every technique fail, those sensations will still cling to him like ice. As his breathing became ragged as he instinctively checked his chest, his missing arm, the wound through his torso, but there was nothing. He was whole once again. And after several long moments of trying to see if maybe this was all an illusion or maybe this was all a dream, Subaru would come to the realization that he indeed had returned by death. As once that truth settled into his mind, Subaru would waste no time. As with grim determination, he would immediately race back towards the mansion, intending to save Emilia and everyone else before disaster could strike. But unfortunately for Subaru, events would not go as he intended. As over the following loops, Subaru would fail again and again, each death granting him more information and each attempt sharpening his understanding, but unfortunately, even though he had learned about a lot of things like Perugius, the Sin Archbishop of Sloth, his authority, his spirit transferring, and even learning about Pug's final form, the Beast of the End, all these things would remain completely useless in the face of one remaining obstacle: Regulus Corneus. As no matter what Subaru had attempted, no matter which plans or strategy he had thought of, Regulus was always there and would always be an obstacle in his path. As no matter what Subaru did, whether it be an ambush, traps, deviation tactics, direct combat, coordinated attacks, escape routes, assassination attempts, it all ended the same way. Regulus remained untouched, unaffected, perfectly intact, like a man separated from reality itself. Subaru's flames cannot burn him, lightning cannot strike him, Kamui cannot warp him, even the Tosca blade cannot seal him. And every single time, Subaru failed. And when he did, someone died. Sometimes it was the villagers, sometimes it was Emilia, sometimes it was Rem, sometimes Subaru would survive only long enough to watch everyone else perish before Regulus casually ended him last. As with each loop, the weight on Subaru's shoulder would grow heavier. His anger became exhaustion, his confidence became frustration, and his pride became bitterness. As he begins to question, what was the point of all his strength? What was the point of the Sharingan? What was the point of all the powers he possessed and all the powers he gained throughout his life, if when it truly mattered, he could save no one? And for the first time since arriving in this world, Subaru would begin to feel genuine despair. Especially when it came to this latest loop where everything collapsed completely. In that world, Subaru, Puck, and Regulus all fought against each other in an all-out battle. As while the sky itself froze and shattered under their clash, and the forest was obliterated, mountainsides cracked, and the battlefield became a wasteland of ice and ruin, Regulus would remain untouched. As Puck was the first to be destroyed, but Subaru was killed soon after. As no matter what he threw at Regulus, and no matter how many times he tried to calm down Puck, it all ended in failure. And when Subaru revived, something inside of him nearly broke. He was stood alone in silence, eyes hollow, unable to think about what to do next. As to him, he found it all pointless. What more could he possibly do? What more can he do to save everyone else? As for now, he thought it was hopeless. Then, that's when Rem found him. Now, she didn't know about Return by Death. She did not know about the countless corpses Subaru carried in his memories. She didn't know how many times he had screamed, fought, bled, and died. Yet somehow, she still understood enough. As she sat beside him quietly, then with a gentle and unwavering resolve, she told him that he did not need to shoulder everything alone. She told him that strength was not the same as carrying every burden by himself. She told him that even if he stumbled, even if he failed, even if he looked pathetic, there were people still willing to stand beside him. And she'll finish by telling him that she believed in him. As she'll tell him that he doesn't have to face off against everything by himself, as whatever is out there, she'll be there to help him out. As after all, they were friends. As those simple words would strike deeper than any wound Regulus had ever given him. As Subaru would lower his head and laugh weakly, as tears threatened to spill despite himself, before then he eventually thanked her. As for the first time in many loops, hope had returned. As from there, Subaru and Rem would begin constructing a true strategy to confront the troubles that are ahead. And though Rem found it strange that Subaru seemed to know far too much about the coming witch cult attack, she chose to trust him regardless. As instead of recklessly trying to solve everything on his own, Subaru would seek allies, as in this timeline it would be Rem who suggested requesting aid from the other royal candidates, which Subaru would follow that advice. Thus would begin the negotiations between Cruce and Anastasia. As similar to the main timeline, Subaru would offer valuable information, this being the White Whale's route as well as its timing and when it's going to arrive, along with knowledge of the witch cult's impending strike. And in return, they would lend military support to eliminate the witch cult and would receive access to portions of Roswell's considerable resources. As Cruce and Anastasia, after hearing this, would then accept the deal eventually, although Anastasia was far less eager, as after all, Subaru had publicly humiliated Julius and caused chaos during the royal selection. Still, she was a merchant first and foremost, and from a business perspective, the deal was simply too profitable to ignore. Thus, an alliance was formed. As from here, we would then do a brief time skip, as soon afterwards, Subaru would then stand alongside the combined forces of Cruce and Anastasia near the Great Flugel Tree. As you see, during one of those failed loops, Subaru and Rem had encountered the White Whale while returning to the mansion alone. And in that world, Subaru had unleashed the Susanoo and personally defeated the beast rather easily. But the thing is, doing so only caused them to be a little bit more delayed, as that caused them to encounter Regulus much sooner than expected. And the loop ended with Subaru dying while protecting Rem, as Regulus thought that they were imposing on his rights, so due to that, he decided to just kill Subaru. As remembering that failure, Subaru now chose a different path. As when the White Whale eventually would appear, the battle would then erupt, as immediately this time, Subaru did not seek glory. Instead, he became support. He would race across the battlefield, saving soldiers moments before they would be devoured or consumed by the mist. He used his Sharingan to predict the White Whale's movements, and he would intercept its mist before allies were consumed. And more importantly, he baited the monstrous creature into a vulnerable position so Wilhelm and the rest of the main forces could strike. As he would rescue wounded men and redirect panicked troops, and again he would move through the battlefield like a shadow. As eventually, after a brutal struggle, Wilhelm Van Estrella will land the decisive blow. As the White Whale would then fall, and its massive corpse would then crash into the earth, as a nightmare that once haunted Lagunica for centuries was finally slain. The battlefield erupted into victorious cheers, but Subaru did not celebrate, because he knew this was only the first step. As after the surviving soldiers regrouped and weapons were raised once more, their next destination would be clear, this being the witch cult, and little did they know beyond them would also be Regulus. As from here, we would now do a change of scenes, as we will now turn to it. As now turning to Subaru, we will see him stand at the center of a gathered army, surrounded by all sides by soldiers, knights, and mercenaries, as they had just finished slaying a monster that they thought was invincible. And now their next enemy awaited them in Roswell's domain. As by this point now, Subaru had finished explaining the operation, as the knights and the combat-ready forces would storm the witches' cultist positions and eliminate every cultist they encountered, while the separate squads would move immediately to evacuate Emilia, the villagers, and all the civilians within Roswell's domain. As Subaru made sure to explain things thoroughly. Like Betelgeuse, the Sin Archbishop of Sloth, he detailed the madman's personality, his unseen hands, and his habits of possessing spare bodies, as well as the method required to truly kill him, as many soldiers listened with a mix of disbelief and unease, as they can't believe that Subaru had this much information on the cult. But then again, Subaru, it wasn't too surprising for him, considering the fact that, mind you, Subaru has gone through multiple loops, like way more than the actual main timeline one for this one, just because of Regulus. But still, after listening to all this, and after he finished explaining, Subaru would then cross his arms and then scan at the crowd. If anyone's got questions, ask now, cause once we move, there will be no time for confusion. For a moment, silence followed. Then, a hand slowly rose near the front, as it would belong to none other than Julius. He had arrived only a little bit later after the battle against the White Whale, having regrouped with the Allied forces after prior obligations in the capital. And though he was still composed as ever, there was some noticeable more caution in the way he looked at Subaru now, as after personally experiencing Subaru's overwhelming strength in their duel, Julius no longer viewed him as a reckless commoner, but he viewed him as something very dangerous. As Julius was then clear his throat before then speaking. Excuse me, Natsuki, but I must confess I'm a little bit confused about this. Subaru glanced at him. About what? Julius, hearing this, would hesitate for the briefest moment before eventually speaking. Well, sorry for asking in advance, but with your power, would you not be capable of handling the witch cult yourself? A murmur spread amongst the troops, as many had wondered the same thing. Subaru had overpowered Julius with humiliating ease. He had helped bring down the White Whale, and his name had already begun to quickly spread through Lagunica after the chaos at the royal selection. As the public beating of one of the finest knights, as well as just beating the finest knight in general, to many present, Subaru seemed less like a man and more like a force of nature. So why did he need their help exactly? Subaru stared at Julius for a few seconds before then unexpectedly letting out a quiet laugh. It was not mocking, but you could hear the tiredness within it, as he looked down at his own fist and gave a small yet sad smile. Yeah, normally I would take care of it myself. But unfortunately, there's another threat coming. He'll say this as a smile faded as his fingers tightened. The shift in his tone made the atmosphere instantly heavier as Subaru slowly raised his head, his eyes now cold yet serious. And I'm the only one here who can keep him busy. Confused looks spread through the crowd as Julius frowned. Another threat? Subaru nodded at that. Honestly, even if every single person here fought him together, me included, there's no doubt in my mind that we'd still lose. The words struck like thunder as a visible chill ran through the entire gathered army. Many men instinctively stiffened as others exchanged uneasy glances. I mean, after all, they had just watched Subaru stand against the White Whale without fear, and to hear someone like him speak with such certainty was enough to shake even veteran soldiers. Wilhelm's expression sharpened while Julius's eyes widened slightly, as neither man could believe what they had just heard as they seen Subaru's power, so the fact that even with them helping him, they would still lose, it was shocking. As Subaru would continue without hesitation. The man who was approaching is named Regulus Corneus, and he is a Sin Archbishop of Greed. Several knights flinched at the title alone, as this caused immediate uproar, as they couldn't believe that there was another archbishop already so close by, but Subaru ignored the panic. And as much as I hate to say this, trust me, I really do, the bastard is a real deal. Julius stepped forward, face tense, as he asked if his power is so great, to which Subaru looked at him and then laughed. You have no idea. For a brief moment, Subaru's mind drifted as he remembered the flames that did nothing, letting that vanish, Kamui failing, Susanoo shattering, his own body being torn apart again and again, and everyone dying as in every single loop ending, that same arrogant man stood untouched. As Subaru's jaw tightened as he forces the memory down, before then looking over the entire army. Out of everyone here, I've got the best chance of stalling him before he reaches the mansion. So while I'm handling greed, all of you follow the plan exactly. You wipe out the witch cult, you save Emilia, and you protect the civilians. As this will be a direct order from Subaru as the knights strained instinctively. Wilhelm gave a solemn nod while Julius lowered his head in understanding, as soon after this we will see Subaru as he along with the rest of the forces will then make their ways to the Martyr's domain. As this time he knew exactly what kind of monster awaited him, and this time he did not intend to lose. As from here, we will now do a time skip as well as a change of scenes. So turning to Subaru once again, we will see him as he stood alone in the middle of a vast clearing deep within the forest. As from behind him, we will hear the sound of steel clashing against steel, men shouting commands, and a bunch of war cries as the assault on the Roswell's domain had begun. As Subaru would listen quietly for a moment, then allow himself to have a small smile, as everything was moving according to plan. But you see, while he would do this is when suddenly a voice would then cut through the silence. You there, why are you standing in my way as if the world revolves around you? Move aside, your carelessness is obscuring my path. The tone was irritated and arrogant, filled with casual contempt as Subaru was slowly looking in the direction of who was calling out to him. As a short distance away, we will see Regulus, as he'll be as he always was, dressed in pristine white, hands behind his back, and gold eyes narrowed in annoyance. His expression was that of a nobleman forced to acknowledge dirt on his shoe, as Subaru stared at him for a second before then smiling brightly. Nope. He'll say it cheerfully as Regulus froze. Then the irritation in his face deepened. Fine then. Since you refuse to move, I'll simply remove you. As without warning, a violent gust would then compress into a razor-thin slash and tore across the clearing towards Subaru, while Subaru merely closed his eyes with a smile, as soon we will see the attack as it passed directly through him. As while everything behind him would be destroyed, Subaru would remain unfazed as Regulus' eyes widened, while Subaru would open his own eyes to reveal the Mangekyo Sharingan. You know, Regulus, it's funny how, no matter how many times we do this, you can't stop loving the sound of your own voice. Subaru would say lazily, while Regulus' surprise then turns to fury as Subaru's smirk widened. You keep calling yourself special, but take away that power of yours, and you're just another pathetic spoiled brat. As hearing this causes Regulus to then explode with anger. How dare you! To mock a benevolent man, a reasonable man, such as myself, you have crossed the line between insolence and a criminal offense. As without saying another word, he would then swing his arm downward, as another compressed slash then tore forward fast enough to destroy everything in his path. But unfortunately for Regulus, it would phase directly through Subaru harmlessly, as Subaru chuckled. I guess things never change, do they? Corny ass. He'll say, as for a moment Regulus simply stared. Then, his face twisted into pure rage, but before he could move, Subaru had already vanished. He reappeared directly in front of Regulus and drove a fist into his stomach, as the impact launched Regulus high into the air, and though his body remained unharmed, his expression was one of utter outrage. As he begins to go on a rant, saying how Subaru had violated his rights, but before he could finish, Subaru had warped above him, and with a grin, he would then hammer another punch into Regulus' face and send him plummeting downward like a meteor. As when Regulus crashed into earth down below, the ground exploded outward, as Subaru floated from above and thrust both his hands downward. As soon we will see massive fireballs that begin to rain from the sky, one after another, each detonating with a deafening force and engulfing the battlefield in flames and smoke. However, while all these attacks will be let loose, we will see Regulus as he emerged untouched, his clothes spotless and his skin unmarred, and his golden eyes burning with fury as he opened his mouth to speak, but suddenly a shadow clone of Subaru would then blindside him from the side and then punch him across the landscape. As for several moments, chaos began to reign in as Subaru and his clones assaulted Regulus relentlessly, as they barraged him with all kinds of attacks as every trick Subaru possessed was thrown at him, and every single attack failed to truly damage the Sin Archbishop of Greed. As we will see the battle as they tore through valleys, forests, cliffsides, and stone ridge, until eventually both figures then crashed through one final ridge and landed on top of a distant mountain far removed from Roswell's domain. As dust rose and stone trembled, until silence followed, as when the smoke cleared we will see Subaru as he stood hunched over slightly, breathing heavily. Blood ran from both of his eyes due to the strain of prolonged use of the Mangekyo Sharingan. Bruises covered his body, his clothes were torn, and his chakra reserves were running dangerously low. And yet, despite all of this, he still wore a cocky grin on his face as across from him stood Regulus. Perfect as ever, not a wrinkle in his clothing, not a scratch on his skin, as he looked at Subaru with open disgust. Look at you. Bleeding, gasping, barely standing, like some wild mob beast clinging to life. And yet, you still pretend this exchange has any meaning. You truly are a putrid sight before a perfect being such as myself, he would say with a sneer while Subaru burst out into laughter. As despite the fact that every breath that he took hurt, he still laughed harder as after a few moments he then wiped the blood from his chin and grinned. You really gotta learn when to shut the fuck up for once. Regulus' eyes twitched, but before he could respond, the entire mountain began to shake as a violent rumble spread through the entire stone beneath them. As the peak tilted sharply, with Regulus frowning in confusion, until two shadow clones would then tackle him off the mountain, as they plummeted together in the open air, while Regulus looked utterly unimpressed as they fell. And at that moment, Subaru raised one hand, as his eyes twisted once again, as this is where he would then use the Mangekyo Sharingan to activate Kamui. The space twisted violently as the lower half of the mountain then vanished into a spiraling distortion, as then above the falling Regulus, it would reappear. An entire section of the mountain that descended towards him like divine judgment, as Regulus looked upward in annoyance. How foolish. When will you understand that no matter what you do, I will remain untouched? It is my right. It is the natural state of a truly perfect being such as myself. He would say this while Subaru was falling as well. The shadow remains of the upper mountain collapsed around him, but yet he only smirked. Yeah, you're right. I don't have any way of beating you right now. Subaru would say for a moment, before then he would then grin. So that's why I'm leaving you here. Regulus' eyes narrow as this word was then revealed. From the very start of the battle, Subaru had not been trying to defeat Regulus. He had been dragging him farther and farther away from Roswell's domain. Far from Emilia, far from Rem, far from everyone. As he had chosen a battlefield where greed would be stranded. As Subaru laughed as a stone rained around them as he continued to speak. I may not be able to beat you this time, but the next time we meet, I'll be the one kicking your ass. He'll say as his Sharingan spun as Kamui spiraled around his body. Regulus seeing this roared in fury and launched a slash towards him as Subaru only gave him one final mocking wave goodbye before then vanishing into Kamui. As the slash cut through empty air, as a second later we will see the mountain as it collapsed entirely onto Regulus. As we will see stone, earth, and rubble as it swallowed the Sin Archbishop whole. As from here, this is where we're now able to do another change of scenes. So turning to a few months later, we will see the space twist once more in Roswell's domain, as we will see Subaru as he stumbled out and landed on one knee against the cold earth. For several seconds, he would remain there in silence. His breathing was ragged, his clothes were torn, and blood still trailed from the corners of his eyes, as every muscle in his body was screaming from overuse, and the strain of repeated forcing the Mangekyo Sharingan had left a pounding ache deep within inside his skull. But yet, despite all of this, he had made it back. As Subaru slowly lifted his head and looked around, as you could see the damage of an outlasting battle against the witch cult that happened here. But the thing is, after expanding his senses, Subaru would see that there would be no witch cultists, and no archbishop, there would be nobody. As seeing the area clear, Subaru was finally able to exhale as the tension in his shoulder loosened, as his crimson eyes faded as the Sharingan deactivated, returning to their normal color. As for the first time in what felt like ages, Subaru allowed himself to relax, as he pushed himself to his feet and began making his way towards the village. Each step felt heavier, his body was near its limit, but he continued onward. As he walked beneath the dark sky, as Subaru's thoughts drifted. As he begins to remember every loop that he went through. He remembered the first time he died to Regulus, the helplessness of seeing every attack fail, the countless loops where everyone was slaughtered, and the moments where he himself screamed in rage and despair. He remembered sitting in silence, wondering if his power meant nothing, and then he remembered everything that he had to do to get to this point. As finally, after so much struggling, after all those deaths, after all those failures, a small smile formed on Subaru's face. And it was not arrogant or cocky, it was just relieved as eventually the trees parted and the village came into view. As here, we will see the group of soldiers as they search for any remaining threats, as by this point now, the battle was over. The witch cult had been defeated as Subaru's gaze swept over the scene. Near the center of the village stood Julius and Wilhelm, both seated while Felix hurriedly finished healing their injuries, as their bodies had been bruised but both men were still alive. As seeing this caused Subaru to feel happy, as then someone would notice him and point him out, as this causes everyone to then turn their heads towards him, as we see Julius, Wilhelm, and Felix as they immediately rushed their way towards him as shock had spread across their faces. As they immediately began to check up on him, asking him if he was alright, but Subaru, seeing everyone alive, seeing that everything turned out okay in the end, he would smile as his legs would then give out. And before he could hit the ground, several people caught him as his consciousness began to fade rapidly. The sounds around him became distant, blurry and heavy as darkness slowly took him over. But the thing is, Subaru wasn't, dying, he was instead falling unconscious. As finally, it had all worked out. So that means for the first time in many loops, Subaru was allowed to finally rest. As from here, this is where we're now going to do a large time skip. So following Subaru's battle against greed and the collapse of the witch cult's assault, we will see peace as it finally settled over Roswell's domain. And unlike the original timeline, we will see that tragedy never struck afterwards. Because the White Whale had been defeated much earlier and the allied forces mobilized faster, Cruchet's camp had departed before Gluttony could ever cross paths with them, which means that Cruchet never lost her memories, and Rem never fell into a coma. As that single difference would change everything, as from here we will see Subaru as he was finally allowed to rest. and eventually after waking up and recovering, he would then finally give a sincere apology to Emilia, as soon afterwards we will see things continue to proceed similar to the main timeline. As soon afterwards, we will see Subaru, Emilia, and Rem, along with Otto, who wanted to do business with Roswell, return back to the mansion. As when they're there, they will meet Frederica, Roswell's third maid, as she will end up explaining that Ram, along with half the villagers, were taken to a place known as the Sanctuary for shelter. However, unfortunately, they were currently having some difficulties over there, so they needed Emilia as well as Subaru's help to bring them back. So Frederica ended up entrusting Emilia with a strange blue crystal, and said that would help them cross the Sanctuary barrier. However, upon nearing the forest surrounding the sanctuary, the crystal would suddenly activate, as a brilliant blue light engulfed the group, separating Subaru from the others as he tried to stop the blue light from even happening, as he would find himself alone within the forest. As once there, Subaru would end up walking around for a little bit, finding a mysterious pink-haired girl who would eventually lead him to an ancient tomb. As upon entering the tomb, Subaru would then suddenly be transported, as he would come face to face with the witch greater herself, Echidna. Now their meeting would unfold similar to the original timeline, as although Subaru would be tempted by the forbidden knowledge, he would demand information regarding the Sin Archbishops. Now to his disappointment, Echidna will offer very little to no information about them, which caused Subaru to mentally downgrade her from a terrifying witch to little more than an arrogant librarian. As before leaving, he would even casually insult her one final time, calling her a pervert, leaving Echidna even more speechless, as Subaru felt a little bit creeped out, not even a little bit, he was a lot creeped out over the fact that she fed him tea that was made out of her, well, bodily fluids. But nonetheless, after returning from the tomb, Subaru would then immediately be attacked by Garfo, who, unfortunately for him, Subaru would effortlessly knock him out unconscious, before Otto would then quickly explain the current situation. As once the tension settles, we will see Subaru as he eventually reunites with Emilia and the rest of the group. As once it was there, we will see Subaru as he eventually learns the truth about the sanctuary, and how no one trapped within it could leave. And according to Garfo, the only way everyone can gain their freedom was for Emilia to complete the witch's trials. As from here, we will now enter into the scene. Turning to nighttime, we will see it settle over the sanctuary, as the sky above was dark and endless, illuminated only by the scattering stars and the pale glow of the moon. A cold breeze passed through the forest, rustling the trees surrounding the ancient witch's tomb, and outside of its entrance stood Subaru and the others. Emilia stepped forward, her silver hair swaying gently behind her as she looked towards the stone structure before her. Though nervousness could be seen in her eyes, there was also resolve, as this was something only she could do. As without another word, Emilia would then enter the tomb, as then heavy silence then followed, as it was tense. And after several moments passed, this is when suddenly the tomb began to glow. A strange light pulsed from within its walls, growing unstable, as Subaru's expression sharpened, as he felt as if something was wrong, as without hesitation he would rush forward, and despite everyone telling him to come back, he wouldn't stop. As upon entering the witch's tomb, Subaru would eventually find Emilia, who was collapsed on the ground. As immediately running over to her side and checking to see if she was alive, he would find that she was unconscious. As relief barely had time to settle before Subaru's body, before suddenly Subaru would then feel his eyelids grow heavier. His body would begin to sway as an overwhelming drowsiness flooded through him. Subaru immediately gathered chakra, forcing it through his system in an attempt to resist whatever was happening, but it was useless, as the sensation only deepened and his vision blurred, before eventually Subaru himself had fallen unconscious. As from here, we will now do a quick change of scenes. Looking inside the interior of a temple, we will see it as massive stone pillars line the room. Candles burn in rows along the walls, their dim flames casting long shadows across the floor, as at the far end of the chamber, darkness stretched endlessly. Then we would hear it. Steel clashing, cries of pain ringing out, and bodies falling, as there in the darkness we will see a child, as he would have dark hair, cold eyes, as it will be none other than a young Subaru. His face was expressionless, while his one Tomoe Sharingan glowed faintly in the darkness, as it scanned every movement around him as several men in black ninja attire then charged at him at once. And the child would move. As in mere instants, we will see the child as he became a blur, as he will be slicing down and taking down every last one of these men in black ninja attire until eventually the group itself was finally taken care of. As eventually, after taking care of all of them, the child would then arrive at the final chamber, as it was wide and circular with a great bonfire burning at the center, as around the flames sat several elderly men and women. As the moment they saw the blood-covered child, smiles spread across their wrinkled faces as they began murmuring excitedly, praising, celebrating, until one voice rang out louder than the others. "Long live the pride of the Uchiha!" Young Subaru froze, his eyes widened, As from here, we will see darkness, as Subaru's voice began to echo. I didn't know it at that time, but that was the moment I truly began to despise those words. Images began to flash one after another. Young Subaru being forced through brutal training until his hands bled. Young Subaru studying scrolls after scroll late at night. Young Subaru standing before the elders while giving reports with robotic calmness. Young Subaru collapsing from exhaustion only to be dragged back again. As in every last one of those memories, the same hollow face, the same empty eyes would be shown. As Subaru continued. I despised everything they said. I despised the arrogance in their voice. I despised the looks that they gave me. I despised their very existence. Another memory surfaced. Subaru at the age of 12 as he stood in the temple courtyard surrounded by trained soldiers. They charged him all at once, but moments later, every one of them would lay dead. Some cut down, some burned, some just broken apart as the child stood alone in the center of the slaughter with no reaction at all. And as he exited the temple, the elders greeted him with greedy smiles and thunderous praise as their prized member had returned. They trained me until my body broke. They pushed me until my mind dulled. They wanted the peak of my abilities. They wanted the pride of the Uchiha clan. They wanted their weapon. The next scene formed as a small room would be shown. As there we will see Subaru as he sat at a desk, reading under the candlelight, as outside the sky remained pitch black. As we could see, it was already 4 in the morning as he continued to study with lifeless eyes, until a tear dropped onto the page. He blinked and then another, as slowly the child touched his face to see that it was wet, as that's when he realized he was crying. Yet even then, his expression barely changed. And in the end, they succeeded. They got the weapon they always wanted, all while leaving the broken child they used to create it behind. As from here, we will see the scene fade into darkness once more. I hated them. I hated the clan. I hated their customs. I hated every horrible thing they made me do just to satisfy their own ego and greed. But above all else, I hated myself. I began wondering what the point of living was, if life only meant suffering again and again. I wanted things to change so badly that the only answer I could think of was to destroy the very thing they cherished most, their pride. I wanted to drag the Uchiha name through the dirt. I wanted to destroy its entire legacy, and I wanted to make sure the elders bowed down before me. But in the end, it changed nothing, because no matter what I did, they had already won. As another memory would appear, an older Subaru leaving a meeting hall where the elders had gathered, as he looked annoyed at first, then tired, then sad, as he gazed upward into the star-filled sky. I thought things would always remain the same. But then, everything changed. A new montage would begin, Subaru arriving in Lagunica, meeting Emilia in the alley, living at the mansion, arguing with Ram, talking with Ram, being chased away by Beatrice, and meeting more people as he continued to be here in this world. Standing beside Emilia again, he'll be smiling, actually smiling. No emptiness, no chains, no hollow eyes, nothing. As Subaru's voice grew warm. I met people I could talk to, people I could rely on, people who didn't care about Subaru, the pride of the Uchiha clan. To them, I was just Subaru. And for the first time in my life, I was truly happy. The memories fade as now we will see Subaru as he found himself seated inside a traditional Japanese home. And across from him sat Echidna. She wore a graceful kimono and held a teacup delicately in one hand, as with a pleasant smile she would say, "Thank you, Subaru, for sharing your life story with me." And Subaru, who is now in his normal form, would then snort. "I wasn't talking to you, you perverted witch. I was having a moment to myself. You just decided to be nosy and eavesdrop." Echidna nearly tipped over in surprise, before then she laughed behind her sleeve, saying that Subaru was remarkably rude when speaking to a witch, to which Subaru just shrugged at it. But after this brief comical moment, we will see the conversation then shift, as Echidna would ask Subaru if he finally found what he was looking for, with Subaru pausing for a moment as he takes a moment to reflect. As yes, after seeing all those memories, Subaru saw his entire life basically and how it turned out, and honestly, he felt at peace with his past, and at peace with the present. As despite everything that Subaru has gone through, including the deaths and everything, he doesn't regret it, not even one bit. As he will soon speak to Echidna. Yeah, I did. I didn't know it at the time, but I truly never let them go, did I? I was so hung up on that clan and what they did that I never really moved past it, even when here. So yeah, thank you. Because now I know one thing is for certain. Echidna would look at him confused, wondering what he meant, as this is when Subaru would then suddenly get up. As he then declares confidently that the Uchiha name meant nothing. He wasn't Subaru Uchiha. That title to him doesn't mean anything. It doesn't matter to him. As instead, he was Subaru Natsuki, friend of Emilia and butler of the Roswell estate. As this causes Echidna to look at him for a moment, surprised, before then laughing, as she would then admit that this wasn't exactly how she thought things were going to play out. Before then, she would then ask Subaru what does he plan to do now, to which Subaru then shrugged before then looking up, as he declares that that's up for him to find out, as he plans to enjoy this new life that he's gotten to the fullest, and he plans to embrace it completely. As he'll say this with one final smile before then saying confidently, "I'm done dreaming." As from here, we'll see Echidna as her eyes then widen as she sees Subaru actually leave her own domain, as he would actually awaken back in the real world without her permission. As she looks at him, or where he was before, in shock, before then laughing like a maniac, as truly this didn't go according to her plan. She had planned a lot of things. She had planned to connect with Subaru. She had planned to, learn a lot from him, but apparently Subaru just completely went off the script. This wasn't anything in what she wrote before, as now she doesn't know how things are going to turn out. But that only thrilled her, as she began to laugh, as she truly began to wonder how things would turn out for how things would turn out for Subaru Natsuki. As she was excitedly cooking up theories about what could possibly end up happening, as from here, this is where we're now going to turn back to inside the witch's tomb. As when there, we'll see Subaru, as this when he ends up opening his eyes, as when he does, we will see that this time, the Crimson Sharingan was gone, and in its place would be a pair of ripple patterned purple eyes staring into the darkness. As Subaru had awakened something that only legends have ever heard of, something that was so ancient that even in the modern age it was basically scarce knowledge. As Subaru had entered something that many would deem the domain of the gods. As from here, this is where we're now able to do a large time skip. So following Subaru's completion of the first witch's trial, we will see the rest of the events at the sanctuary as it begins to play out. Now after Emilia would wake up and would begin panicking, Subaru would be there to comfort her, as after doing so, he would then eventually regroup with the others, who were quite surprised over Subaru's sudden awakening. As after all, they didn't know exactly what was going on with him, but one thing was for certain, and it's the fact that Subaru's witch's scent grew stronger. It was enough to the point that Garfield even tried attacking him, but Subaru shut that down instantly. And while everyone else was confused, Subaru himself, he felt alive. He felt more free than he's ever been before, as he was acting kind of eccentric about it. Now obviously this caused some concern for everyone else, but Subaru just made sure to let them know that he was completely fine. As instead from there, we'll see Subaru as he ends up deciding to take the villagers that were at the sanctuary back to Arlem. As although Roswell had tried to advise against it, Subaru had decided to completely ignore the clown, as instead he decided to take things into his own hands. As he ends up taking the villagers back, as once he ended up arriving there, Subaru would encounter some trouble back at the mansion. As he would arrive there earlier than he did in the main timeline, due to that he was able to meet Frederica and Petra as they would be completely fine. But eventually they would be attacked by a couple of assassins. As similar to how it was in the main timeline, Roswell had tried desperately to make his plan work, as he wanted to find a way to take down Subaru and basically force him to go through the trials, so that way he could end up reviving Echidna. Unfortunately, this version of Subaru is basically already at his peak strength, so that means that Subaru was able to take care of them with relative ease. And eventually, after returning back to, the sanctuary, he would actually even give encouragement to Emilia to help her pass the trials, to which she would eventually do so in order to pass it. Now for Roswell, he would try one last final gambit, and that's to bring forth the Great Rabbit. The great mob beast that was said to be one of, if not the most powerful one out there, being able to devour basically everything in his path, all because of its insatiable hunger. But the thing is, even though Roswell would try doing this, Subaru would be able to shut him down. As when the Great Rabbit does eventually end up arriving, Subaru would be able to take care of them all by himself. As due to being equipped with the Renegon, Subaru's control over just the force in general is already extremely OP against the Great Rabbit, as he's basically able to swallow them all up in a Chibaku Tensei, basically bringing forth all the rabbits into one spiraling black hole that consumes all of them in an instant, which surprises Roswell and everyone else. As Subaru will be able to take care of the events of the sanctuary relatively easily without going through another trial, as Subaru had already confronted basically all the events of his past and was able to make peace with himself way earlier on, so that means that this Subaru is basically already at his peak. And this would transition even better, as after taking care of the sanctuary and after helping Emilia pass it, Subaru and the rest of them would return back to the mansion. As once there, Subaru would then encounter Beatrice, as the two would actually have a little moment to talk with each other. As it would mostly be Beatrice who finally had enough of Subaru barging in and being around her, as she wanted Subaru to go away. But the way that she says it in this timeline, it's going to be more like she's desperately trying to push him away so that way she doesn't get attached. As Beatrice has found herself connecting more and more with Subaru compared to everyone else and basically everyone that she ever encountered with, and she was scared of that. But Subaru, he wasn't easily pushed away. And I mean seriously, he has the Renegon now. Her little wind blast was not pushing him away. As instead, he decided to actually stick by her, as even though she continuously tried telling him that she doesn't want him here, Subaru would actually let her know that he would remain there for as long as she wanted him to, as after all, he was never going to abandon her, as they were friends. And this causes Beatrice to then obviously break down, as she says that he's lying, trying to deny it, but Subaru wasn't willing to give up on her. As eventually, this will lead the two to have a very heartwarming and wholesome moment, until eventually Beatrice then decides to form a contract with Subaru. As eventually, after Subaru ends up learning about who that person was and everything, Subaru decides to actually leave it up to her to decide whether or not she wants him to be that person for her. And eventually Beatrice, similar to the main timeline, would choose Subaru, as she ends up choosing him to be her contractor, which leads to the two forming a contract with each other. As this will lead to Subaru not only having the Renegon, but now having a great spirit of yin. As now with all this being taken care of, this is where we're now able to turn to the events of Season 3. So following the events of the sanctuary, we will now turn to a whole year that passes by, as we see Subaru along with the rest of the Emilia camp as they had grown stronger during this year. Due to the fact that Rem wasn't in a coma, and due to the fact that basically Garfield and the rest of the sanctuary was already free, we will see the Emilia camp as it became way stronger. And not only that, but we also see Subaru as during this time he actually spent it enjoying himself. And not only that, but also testing out and training with his newfound Renegon. As with it, Subaru would find himself unlocking more abilities than he ever even thought of, and not only that, but would even find that his old abilities getting stronger due to it. And on top of all of this, we would end up seeing Subaru as he even trains with magic, as after so long he had finally decided to test it out. And thanks to the help of Beatrice along with the Renegon, Subaru was able to become proficient with it as well, as he begins to get more mastery over yin magic. As soon after all this was taken care of, we will eventually see Emilia and the rest of her camp as they end up getting invited to the Watergate city of Priscilla, as this invite would be from both Cruce as well as Anastasia, to which Emilia and her group would eventually end up accepting. However, upon their arrival there, complications will soon find them. As although in the beginning things are pretty nice and peaceful, as Subaru along with the rest of the royal candidates and their parties would be there and just enjoying their time there at the Watergate city. But while there, this is when, while Subaru and Emilia would be walking through the Watergate city, just enjoying the view and everything, this is when Emilia would then bump into a very familiar man. As when she's there, she would apologize, but the man himself didn't really say anything, as instead he would reach towards Emilia's face. As Emilia would look at him confused, wondering who he was, until suddenly, Subaru would then vanish. As before Emilia or the man could react, Subaru would then suddenly punch the man away as he would be sent flying into the air, while Emilia would look on in shock, asking Subaru what was that about, but to her surprise, Subaru would have a very deadly serious expression, as he tells Emilia that she should actually go regroup with the others, as he says that he's gonna have to take care of this himself. As she wonders what he means, but this is when Subaru would then summon a bunch of shadow clones, telling her that everything will be fine, as he ends up looking at her with a smile, letting her know that this time he will handle it himself properly. As Emilia would only be more confused, but Subaru would already jump up into the air as he ends up going after the man he had just sent flying. As turning to the man, we will see him as he ends up crashing landing into a different part of the Watergate City, but would be completely untouched. He would remain absolute. You again? How dare you? Do you not understand what you're doing is a complete violation of my rights? When will you learn, you insignificant man, that your place is below me? That I am absolute. He will say this as we will see Subaru, who ends up landing a couple feet away. Oh man, I can't believe I actually got to run into you again. How long has it been? Corny ass. He will say with a wide grin on his face, as here we will not actually see the man that Subaru was talking to, as it would be none other than Regulus Corneas. As he was dressed in his usual all-white attire, as he would remain unfazed as he looked at Subaru with pure anger and disgust. How dare you? You insult me, a reasonable, benevolent man with such a belittling name. And to make it even worse, you intrude on my moment with my bride, with my possession. Your existence has gone on for long enough. I shall make sure to finish you here and now. He'll say while Subaru just snorts. It's funny that you say that, because I'm not gonna lie, I've been thinking about you a lot, and I've just been thinking how much I would love to beat the living crap out of you. He would say with a cocky grin on his face, as Regulus looked even more annoyed as he tells Subaru to die. As soon we will see an invisible force to us as it rushes at Subaru, intending to cut him in half, but Subaru just looks at it and smirks. As soon we will see the familiar scene as Regulus's attack would then phase directly through Subaru, as he remains completely unfazed. As Regulus seeing this would be disgusted while Subaru burst out into laughter. Oh man, you really don't change at all, do you? Oh well, I guess that's for the better. Cause remember what I promised? Regulus hearing this, his eyes would widen as in the very next moment, this is when suddenly Subaru would appear before him and begin to barrage him with blows. As here we will see Subaru as he begins to continuously barrage Regulus with a bunch of attacks, as he will begin to work in coordination with even shadow clones that he summons. Now Regulus himself, he will be able to destroy and be unaffected by basically everything that Subaru threw at him. No matter even if Subaru had the Renegon, it doesn't matter as Regulus remained untouched, perfect as always. But the thing is, Subaru was already thinking differently, as throughout these barrages and exchange, his eyes would remain fixated on Regulus, thinking, analyzing, searching, because despite all his powers, nothing had worked. Nothing. Shinra Tensei didn't work, Kamui didn't work, even the Chubaku Tensei didn't work, as every attack failed to truly touch him. But the thing is, Subaru already knew why. Because due to that 1 year that Subaru spent training and honing his skills, he had actually studied up and tried learning more about Regulus. And while there wasn't much information to gain on him, him and Beatrice had came up with a theory that worked a lot when it came to exactly how Regulus was being as he was. As all of it was tied to Regulus's authority. A power that disconnected from logic, as to Subaru it became obvious over time that his body simply existed outside the flow of time itself. And the more they clashed, Subaru found this theory becoming even more true. As mind you, Kamui has the ability to warp the space itself, and yet somehow, someway, Regulus remained completely unaffected by it. It was almost as if he was just stuck in the moment, like he was continuously the same as always. And that's what caused Subaru to lead to that theory, and what causes Subaru to eventually come to that realization. As the two continue fighting, which their fight now began to draw a lot more attention from people who were watching the scene before them, as Subaru will be getting sent flying once again by Regulus, who remain completely unaffected. This is where we'll see Subaru as he ends up landing and just ends up laughing out of nowhere. Is this what desperation looks like in its final moment? You truly are a putrid sight. he would say as he looks at Subaru, who ends up laughing once again before then smirking. I finally get it now. Regulus' eyes would narrow in confusion as Subaru continued. You're scared. Silence would follow briefly before then Regulus would then erupt with anger as he wonders what Subaru is speaking. You ignorant little insect. You dare imply fear exists within me? He would say dangerously, while Subaru just laughed weakly. How many times did you look in that direction? 15? 20? No. It was 30 times, was it? I believe it was a bunch of women, was it? Regulus froze as Subaru didn't wipe the blood from his mouth. Every time we were near a certain location, you checked behind you every single time to make sure that I didn't cause any damage to that area. That means there's something important in there. Something you don't want me to find out. For the first time in the entire fight, Regulus finally stopped talking. As this one silence alone confirmed everything as Subaru's grin widened. I found you out. Regulus hearing this then moved instantly, as Subaru barely activated Shinra Tensei in time just to avoid a wave of invisible force that was trying to slice him apart. And he wasn't even done, as soon we will see Regulus as he continues to attack Subaru, as Subaru was launched backwards to several ruined buildings as he would feel pain throughout his body. But even then, he would force himself upright, because now wasn't a time for him to lose. No, this time, he was gonna win, and he was gonna make sure of it. As we see Regulus as he descended slowly through the smoke, but now there was no longer any arrogance remaining, now pure fury. You've overstayed your welcome long enough. Subaru smirked. Funny, I was just thinking the same thing. As then his Renegon pulsed, as soon we will see the space warp once again, as a shadow clone will then appear before him instantly. And then another, as soon we will see dozens of clones appear, as Regulus scoffed. It doesn't matter how much meaningless trash you bring forth, the results will remain the same. He would say, but before he could finish, all these clones would then finally rush at him, as Regulus grows angry at Subaru interrupting him as he ends up slaughtering through the clones easily, sending waves of attack that each clone would end up getting hit by and poofing away, but the original Subaru would see this and smirk even more. As using the Renegon along with Kamui, we will see Subaru as he begins to maneuver through the battlefield, pushing Regulus away, throwing obstacles at him, while Regulus would remain untouched and unaffected. As he grew angry, as he was actively hunting down Subaru trying to get to him, until eventually he would catch him. As in a certain moment, we'll see Subaru as he had supposedly let his guard down, which gave Regulus the perfect opening, as he ends up landing a very soft and delicate punch on Subaru. Which to Regulus it was a soft and delicate punch, but to Subaru, that punch carries so much force that he actually felt the bones in his body break apart a bit as he gets sent flying and crashing. But yet, even though he had felt so much damage, Subaru would be laughing like a maniac, laughing harder and harder as Regulus approached, now looking at Subaru with even more disgust and hatred as he tells Subaru to die. As here we will see Regulus as he attempts to kick the rubble directly into Subaru and to finish him off, but when he does this, he would feel pain. What? No, that's impossible. Not for me. I should never be able to feel these things. That's not right. This is not right. He will say this as he ends up looking down at the rock that he wasn't able to kick as he wonders what's going on, only for Subaru to then get up as he continues laughing. Oh man. You really should have paid more attention to your surroundings. Regulus wondered what he meant until Subaru would then smirk and look in the direction behind Regulus, which causes Regulus to then turn around, as that's when he then feels it. The connections that he once had to his many wives, the ones that had supposedly remained faithful to him, the connection that gave him his strength to be who he was now, was gone. Regulus can no longer feel their so-called love. He can't feel any connection at all. What have you done? Regulus would question with pure anger in his tone, with Subaru smirking as his body would already be working on trying to contain all the pain and all the damage he has done, as we see him summon the King of Hell soon after. Simple. I guess my daughter's adorable charm actually won over your so-called brides, he would say with a smile, as Regulus' eyes widen as we will now turn to Beatrice. You see, due to her connection with Subaru, due to her contract, she was able to find out exactly what Subaru was planning. And this would end up causing her to have a very pleased look, as we will now turn to see the scene before her. Using the ability known as Al-Shamak, Beatrice was able to teleport and basically banish or isolate Regulus's wives to a different plane of existence, which means that Regulus lost his connection to them, which means that his Lionheart ability was no longer in effect, which means the little king was now vulnerable. As turning back to Regulus, he would begin to panic, saying that this was impossible, that this shouldn't happen to him, to a flawless being like him. No, this was wrong. But before he could think any further, Subaru would already be before him. As he would grab Regulus by the neck and hoist him up into the air, as Regulus would struggle as he was pathetically weak compared to Subaru at this moment, as Subaru seeing the scene before him would then laugh before then looking at Regulus directly in the eyes. Remember, I did tell you that the next time we meet, I was gonna be the one to kick your ass. Regulus' eyes widened as before he could do anything else, Subaru would begin to already unleash his barrage. As for the next few moments, we will see Subaru as he begins to unleash basically hell onto Regulus, who is now completely at his mercy. Little King can no longer activate its effect, as that means that Regulus can no longer freeze time on himself, which means he was completely vulnerable to Subaru. As the one who wanted all and more was now losing to the one who left it all behind. As from here, we will see Subaru as he begins to barrage Regulus with a bunch of attacks, as Regulus is unable to do anything, taking the beating as his body is not able to handle it, as he begins to scream in his mind. Why? Why was this happening to him? What did he do to deserve this? As Regulus begins to imagine all his wives and everyone, people he's never even met before, just laughing at him, as he questions what's so funny? What's so funny about doing it to someone like him, someone who did no wrong? As he begins to wonder all this until eventually he gets slammed hard into the ground by Subaru, who ends up laughing at his dismay. As now looking at Regulus, who by this point now was looking like a bloody pulp, he will look at Subaru one last time. As the once arrogant and prideful man, the one who thought he stood above all others, was now at a mercy at someone who he deemed inferior. As Regulus can only utter one last phrase, monster. And Subaru hearing this would smirk in delight, as he casually ends up stomping over Regulus before saying that, yeah, I am. I'm a monster, and I'm gonna keep being one to make sure my friends are safe. So that's why I do the world a favor and die. As Regulus hearing this would then scream out in terror, as Subaru would then finally reach out and touch him with his hand, as there we would then see it, as Subaru would then rip out the soul of Regulus using the effect of the Renegon, as Regulus' body goes still and cold, before eventually Subaru allowed the King of Hell to swallow Regulus' very soul. As now with that, Regulus, the Sin Archbishop of Greed, the strongest of the Archbishop, was now finally defeated by the hands of Subaru Natsuki. As with this being the final scene, this is where we're now able to do one last large time skip. So following Regulus' death, you'll see the rest of the events in Water City as they play out. As just like in the main timeline, there will be an all-out battle against the witch cult, but in this timeline, there will be no casualties. As due to Subaru's assistance, and due to Emilia's camp being way stronger compared to how it was in the main timeline, we will see the entirety of the allied forces as they take care of the witch cult and even the archbishops that were there. As wrath and even lust as well as gluttony would all be taken care of in that very day, with it going down as a very historic moment for every last one of the camps. As soon afterwards, we will then turn to the next following years that went by. As throughout these years, we will see Subaru along with Emilia and the rest of her camp as they slowly went on more adventures and faced off against more threats. And although challenges were there here and there, eventually they were able to overcome them. Enough to the point where eventually they'll stack up enough achievements and enough credibility that Emilia would end up winning over the entirety of Lagunica, to the point where she would successfully end up becoming the Queen of Lagunica. And by her side would be the person who stood by her through it all, the one who helped her get to this point, the man who fought the Sin Archbishop of Greed, the warrior who stood at the center of disaster and prevented Priscilla from falling, and the man who went through everything he could to help his friend survive. This being none other than Subaru Natsuki. as not only did he end up going through all this, but he would actually end up marrying Emilia in this timeline, as the two would successfully get together. As the final scene of this what if will be Subaru, as you'll see him living happily with Emilia, Beatrice, with the rest of the Emilia camp, as he would be smiling, looking over the dawn of a new day. As now with that being said, this will be the end to what if Subaru was an Uchiha. Thank y'all so much for tuning into this what if. I really hope y'all do enjoy. Sorry this what if took so long to come out, because the fact is, as you guys can see, your boy was giving this what if a lot of thought. Like I was actually like thinking a lot for this what if, and I'm not gonna lie to you, there was a lot of stuff that I wanted to put in here that I had to cut out, because this what if was gonna go for like basically 6 hours long, and I was like, no way I was gonna do that. I'm sorry. But still, y'all, I really did enjoy making this what if. I do enjoy making what ifs in general, so you know, sub up, like, subscribe, you know, comment down below. And if you guys have your own what if ideas, share them, you know, who knows, I might make them. But still, y'all, it's your host AG Samurai here, and he's signing off. So peace and have a lovely day.
Color, this is the color, this is the color, twist the color, twist the color, twist the color, twist it, twist the color, color, this is the color, this is the color, twist the color, twist the color, twist the color, twist it, twist the color.